Hello everyone. I am your dark narrator here to guide you today. I know many of you use this video to help you drift off to sleep, but before you do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also drop a comment letting us know where you're from and what time you're watching. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. If you ask anyone with a passion for writing what the best feeling in the world is, I would bet money on them saying the feeling they get when writing. But it's not just the writing that is special. It's the beautiful feeling of putting your innermost thoughts onto a page, being able to share a mystical world you've created in your mind. It feels vulnerable, like you are cracking your own head open and putting it on display for anyone to see, to love, to hate, to judge. The moment you feel your thoughts just falling onto the page, it's like you're not even thinking about it. It just somehow falls in place and makes a coherent story that you've put everything into. It's unlike any drug or any other high. The feeling of ideas flowing, creativity. That is everything to a writer. So what is the worst feeling in the world for a writer then? I bet that isn't a hard question for anyone. Writer's block. Few things feel worse when you are a writer. What do you think happens when a writer gets writer's block? It's the complete opposite feeling. Not having any ideas in your head to escape to throughout the day can feel like hell. It's like the drug has been taken from you, but you can just get more by buying some. It's not like running to the store to grab a six-pack of beer. That dopamine is blocked until you have a new, fresh idea. Your own flesh and bone stopping you from pleasure. That's not even taking into account the pressure from others to write and get something out that will do well. All that being said, I am here to talk to you all about what happens when a writer is desperate for an idea and the lengths they will go to for an idea. My good friend Thomas went missing last week. He was a writer who found a way around his writer's block through very unconditional methods that led to his disappearance. To do this whole situation justice, I need to go back. Way back to when I met Thomas. The two of us met in our junior year of college in a writing class. We were both put in a writing group with 3 other people. We both had an amazing time with the class and the writing group. I always knew the reason I enjoyed it so much was because of Thomas. After we finished the class, the two of us continued to meet up and help each other out with our writing projects or bounce ideas off of one another. Even on days we just wanted to hang out and play video games or something, it would always end up with us talking about our writing projects. Short stories, screenplays, books, all of it. Thomas felt like an absolute machine when it came to stories. For the most part, I felt like I could keep up with him, but the guy always had some new idea to tell me about. I've never met someone who has my style of writing like him. We both liked writing in many different styles. I don't think I have a favorite genre, but without a doubt, Thomas liked writing horror the most. I think people make a lot of assumptions when someone writes horror, especially if they are a good horror writer. They must be really messed up in the head to come up with such terrifying ideas. A murderer, a psychopath, a deeply disturbed individual. The truth is, that couldn't be farther from who Thomas was. One of the kindest, gentlest people you'd ever meet. I remember when he started to act strange. We were at a house party with maybe 15 old friends from college. I saw Thomas being quiet in the corner. Now, to the average person, this probably looked like normal behavior for him. He wasn't a big party person. Whenever I did convince him to come to one with my extroverted ass, he would prefer to just observe everyone else and I would do all the talking for him. He said that watching people in conversation helped him with his writing. That being said, I could tell he was off. He was looking down and just seemed empty. After knowing him for so long, I swore I could tell when he was in his own imaginary world. I could see the gears turning in his head and I'd get so excited to hear all about his new idea later. I should have gone up to him at that moment. Instead, I just stood at the beer pong table like a damn idiot. There were so many moments when I could have gone over to him to talk, but I didn't. Thomas has never been one to talk about feelings, but that doesn't excuse me from not wanting to try. I'm not a guy big on feelings either, but I don't try and actively avoid it. The mix of loud music, alcohol, and pretty girls definitely made it hard for me to talk to my buddy about how he felt. That night ended with him giving me and a few other guys a ride home. He was normally our DD for nights like this. He always said he didn't want a clouded up head just in case he got an idea. Some might say a shot or two would only help, but not Thomas. He wasn't a religious guy, he just always wanted to be ready for an idea. It was his whole life, always escaping into his own little world of make-believe and fantasy. It was always more fun to him than the real world. I sometimes felt like the only reason he wanted to be my friend was because I helped give him ideas to escape into. Sure, sometimes we'd watch a football game or go to a party, but I don't know. I guess sometimes I felt used. I would push off those thoughts when they pierced my brain because I didn't know if I was using him too. Would I even be his friend if he wasn't a good writer? I guess we pick our friends for a reason, right? Similar hobbies or interests. Maybe we did use each other for our own personal gain, but is it all that bad if we are both doing it? Sorry, I went on a bit of a side tangent there. I'm still processing so much. Anyway, back to that night after the party. I was the last person he needed to drop off that night. As he pulled up to my house, he said goodbye, but I got the courage to ask him if he was okay. "Hey man, you good?" "Yeah, just tired," he murmured without looking up. "Okay, well, are we still good to meet up tomorrow for lunch?" I asked, accepting that to perk him up. "Oh, about that, I think I'm actually busy tomorrow, sorry." "What do you mean busy? It's Saturday. What else could you possibly want to do other than talk about our projects?" "You know I have other things I need to do sometimes, right?" He responded with annoyance. "Damn dude, chill, I'm just trying to help. We can just skip this week's meeting, okay?" I said, trying to make eye contact. "Yeah, fine," he whispered while facing his body farther from mine. I got out of the car and he raced off. As I got into my room, I felt so annoyed. It felt like he blew me off. I had projects that needed to be worked on. I needed his help and input on things. I knew if it was the other way around, he'd be pissed off. As the morning came along, I started to cool down. If he needed space, I should give it to him. Maybe I needed a break too. The week went by without me hearing from him. It wasn't that out of the ordinary to go a week without hearing from him, but after the way he was acting, I was definitely anxious to see him again. We typically hung out on Saturday afternoon, so I texted him on Friday to make sure we were still good to meet up. He gave me a few excuses for why he couldn't meet, but I convinced him. As we met up at our normal place, I saw him walk in as I sat at the table. I've never seen him so lifeless. His hair was greasy and his clothes were unkempt. I saw his red eyes and the bags underneath them to match from the other side of the room. He made eye contact with me and put on the fakest smile I have ever seen in my life. He walked to the table and sat down with way too much fake enthusiasm. "Hey Jake, sorry I've been so busy. I want to hear the progress you've made and what new stuff you have going on," Thomas stated with inauthentic cheer. I paused and squinted my eyes at him, waiting for it to be a joke or something. Normally I have to fight him to talk about myself, but now he is telling me to go first. No worries. You needed some space. I can respect that. But can I ask again if everything is okay? You can go first if you want, I really don't mind," I said, but was met with the still-lasting plastic smile of my friend. "Please, you go," Thomas said through his teeth while his smile was starting to break and the tone of voice was flat. I didn't want to keep pushing him. Him sitting and listening to me talk was way better than him storming out because he didn't want to talk first. I started to tell him what I was working on and showed him some mock-ups I had. I must have talked for an hour straight without interruptions. That was unheard of from him. We would always bounce back and forth, sometimes interrupting each other with ideas. It never felt rude. It's just how we talked. In the hour of my talking, I left so many spaces for him to resound to me or give input. The conversation was so bare and boring, like an awkward first date where I'm doing all the talking. For the first time in our whole friendship, I ran out of things to say. "All right, I appreciate you giving me space to talk, but I'd love to hear what you have going on," I said with hope, but was only met with glossy eyes looking back at mine. He sat frozen looking at me, looking like he was going to talk, but sat for a good minute before responding to me. "Well, this was nice. Thanks for meeting up with me. I think I should get going," he said while pushing himself back in his chair to stand up. "Thomas, please stay and tell me what is going on, please," I begged him while he fought the urge to leave that restaurant. Without making eye contact, he slowly sat back down. We sat in silence as I waited for him to speak up. I was only met with brief glimpses that held embarrassment and shame. I started to get even more worried, but he finally spoke up. "Okay, fine, I'll talk, but please don't tell anyone else what I'm about to tell you," Thomas managed to say to me while looking at his shoes. I was prepared for him to tell me he killed someone with the way he was talking and acting. I dug my fingernails into the side of my thigh to prepare myself to not react to whatever wild thing was about to come out of his mouth. I have writer's block," he whispered with guilt. "Wait, what? Writer's block? You scared me," I said with relief. "Seriously? I thought of all the people you would get it. he said with frustration finally meeting my eye line. No, that's not what I meant. I was just trying to say, I replied as I got interrupted. This isn't just a case of writer's block. This is something so much worse. I have nothing. Nada. That isn't me. I have no place in my mind to escape, no ongoing stories I can add to during the day. When I sit down at my desk every night to write, I just stare at the screen, mindless. Sometimes sure I feel stuck or a little lost. Maybe I need some time to map a storyline out. But do you know what I do when that happens? I move on to another story, or work on a character, or I don't know. I work on something, but I have nothing. Nothing at all. My mind is blank. No ideas. He sat for a moment thinking. I gave him the space that he needed until he gathered his thoughts. I am nothing if I don't have my ability to create, he admitted with a deep breath. Listen, this will pass, I promise. Every single writer loses inspiration at some point. You will find a spark again. You just need to push through it. Go on a trip, get away, go do something new. You don't understand. I've tried everything I can. I feel so empty. Come on, I know you got this. How about we go do something fun tomorrow? Maybe you need to stop trying to get an idea. That's how we've gotten some of our best stories, right? While messing around doing something dumb, I said as I saw a slight glimmer of hope in his smile. Yeah, okay, let's give it a shot. Why not? I've got nothing left to lose. Great, pick me up at noon tomorrow and we can go ride roller coasters or something. Sure, I can do that, he remarked as I saw the tiniest bit of the old Thomas start to peek through his hard new shell. That next day, everything started to fall apart. I was spending the morning just hanging out around my house, not really watching the time or anything. I was just walking through my kitchen when I glanced at the clock on my oven. 1:03, I read as my heart sank. I looked at my phone praying that I had a notification from him saying he was going to be late, but I was met with an even worse message. On my way over, sent at 11:45. The pit in my stomach only deepened as I read the sent time. I thought he just bailed on me. I never imagined something happened to him. I tried to call him over and over again, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried to get in contact with other people he knew, but didn't have many of their contacts. After what felt like an eternity, I got a text from him. I'm at the Newbridge Hospital, room 501. Get here ASAP. I jumped in my car and got there as fast as I could. I finally made it to the hospital, unsure what I was going to see when I got to his room. It was a good sign that he was the one to text me. But why was he so vague? The room I entered was filled with the sound of a loud, clicking keyboard and a focused Thomas. He had a large bandage on his left forearm with many cuts and bruises covering his whole body. Tom? Oh my gosh, what happened? I said in shock, but was only met with a bright, glowing smile from my very happy friend. The best thing ever, that's what happened, he replied, giddy as a little kid. What are you talking about? Did you crash your car on your way over? How badly are you hurt? Stop. None of that matters. I'm fine. What really matters is that I got a story idea. That's what I'm typing up now. Oh man, I feel so alive right now, he proclaimed as he passionately typed on his laptop. What? That's awesome. How did you get an idea yesterday? I asked as I got closer to my friend in his hospital bed. He suddenly stopped and took his eyes off his computer screen for the first time since I entered the room. I flipped my car, Thomas said while folding his laptop screen to see me better. You flipped it? Oh my gosh, are you okay? Yes, I'm fine, but I don't think you understand. I got my idea when I flipped my car. Well, is your story about a car accident or something? I said while leaning in. No, that's the thing. It has nothing to do with a car. I don't know if I can't even explain it. My tire popped out of nowhere. My car did a complete barrel roll. I was in midair for maybe 5 seconds at most. You know how some people say their whole life flashes before their eyes when they think they're about to die? That kind of happened, but it was different for me. Those 5 seconds felt like hours. I remember accepting the fact that I was going to die. I felt it in my bones. I gripped down on my steering wheel and closed my eyes. I thought I was going to see death, but I didn't. I saw a complete storyline, a beginning, middle, and end. I saw characters, plot lines, twists and turns, a whole beautiful story. I don't know how to explain it, but when I thought I was going to die, it cured my writer's block. I can't believe that's what it took. That's great, man. I'm glad some good came out of it. I smiled. No, it isn't just some good. This is huge. I feel better. I saw something strange in him at that moment. He looked terrible. Sure, he could have looked way worse considering he flipped his freaking car, but it was shocking to see all those cuts. Yet he had such a fire behind his eyes. At what first seemed like a good passion started to feel like an obsession, like Gollum holding the one true ring. I didn't end up staying long as some family showed up soon after me. I didn't want to overstay my welcome. Fortunately, he wasn't in the hospital for long. I met up with him in person just a couple days later because he seemed excited to talk about new projects. I was really hoping when I saw him face to face that scary look in his eye would be gone, but I was sorely mistaken. I saw him and was met with not only a crazed look in his eye, but more cuts and berries. He slammed down a binder and several notebooks onto the table in front of us. He didn't even look me in the eye or ask me how I was. He immediately started to run through his ideas and talk a million miles an hour. I interrupted him just minutes after he started. "Thomas," I said as I was met with a glare for interrupting. "Slow down. Have you slept since you got in that car accident?" He blinked at me slowly and glanced around as if he was just coming out of a coma. "No, I haven't slept much really. But now that I have ideas, I can't sleep. I don't want to lose them. I can't go back to not having ideas. I'm nothing without them." "Stop saying that." We stared at each other blankly for what felt like forever. "Can you tell me how you got more injuries?" I said as he broke eye contact and tried to go back to his piles of papers on the table. "Hey, answer me. I'm worried about you. Please talk to me." He looked around timidly, then started to whisper. "Okay, I'll talk. After I crashed my car, I got that amazing idea. I got my first drift down in record time. It was coming together great, but I fell into a depression again after I finished it. I was hoping my writer's block curse was broken. I thought ideas would just start to magically come out of my head. However, that wasn't the case. The accident helped me come up with just that one idea. Then nothing. But then I realized, if a near-death experience gave me an idea, what if I just almost died again and, well, it worked. I went for a swim in the ocean yesterday to clear my head and got caught in a terrible current. I gave up and started to drown when a surfer grabbed me out of the water. As I started to struggle in the water, pictures started coming into my head. Fully formed stories. I felt like I was dying, but I didn't care. Something happens to me when I think I'm going to die. Okay, maybe you are overthinking this. What if we tried bungee jumping or something a little bit more controlled? No, I tried that. I have to fully give in to death. I can't be scared. I can't do something that makes my stomach drop. I have to think I'm about to die. Maybe it's my brain's last-ditch effort to try and keep me alive. My brain knows the thing to keep me most motivated to stay alive would be to give me a story idea that I just have to write down. Little does it know it could be the thing that ultimately kills me in the end, he said with a chuckle as he sipped his coffee. "Thomas, don't say that. This will not be how you die. I won't let you just kill yourself." "Fine, then you tell me how on earth am I supposed to stop doing this? I found a surefire way to come up with amazing ideas and I'm supposed to just stop? I'm sure I can find a controlled way to almost die. And even if I don't, I will die doing what I love most. I cannot believe you are just accepting this as your fate. It is selfish of you to be okay with just dying one day. Think of how me and your family will feel without you. You have to think of more than just yourself here. Please," I begged my friend. "Jake, I have no plans to die. I will be fine. I'm not going to just throw myself around every day trying to kill myself." "Fine, just please try and be as safe as you can be. I mean, as safe as someone purposely trying to die can be," I said with disbelief at what just came out of my mouth. I walked away from that conversation confused and worried. My friend seemed truly happy for the first time in so long, but I couldn't rest easy knowing at any minute he could be dying somewhere. I always felt like I needed to go to his house or call him just to make sure he wasn't in the middle of trying to escape death. Every time I saw him, he had the best ideas he's ever had. He was also having great success with the things he was coming up with. He was making money from posting stories online and even got a book deal. I saw my friend beaming with joy. It was so hard to be happy for him. His happiness was always in the frame of his injured body. A new cast or bandage appears weekly. One day he barely had his voice left. I saw a mark around his neck where a noose had been. The man escaped a self-induced hanging, all for a short story about a magical car that people disappear into or something. My friend was fading, and he was fading fast. He was a victim to himself, addicted to almost dying and the high of ideas that came from it. He got put on suicide watch at one point, spent a few weeks in a mental hospital. After he got out of course, he just started back up again, but realized he had to find methods that didn't leave obvious marks on his skin. He couldn't look like he wanted to die. To most people around him, he seemed fine. Just passionate about his writing projects. In reality, he was still almost dying multiple times a week. Maybe I should have told someone he was still almost killing himself. No, I definitely should have told someone. I just knew if I told someone he would just resent me and keep doing what he was doing once they let him go again. He was actually suicidal. He wasn't mentally unwell. It was the best he had ever been. His happiness just came with an extra cost and risk. I stopped asking him how he was almost killing himself. I knew he did it again when he had a sudden surge of ideas. He got really good at controlling it. He had streamlined ways of electrocution and drowning that seemed to work a lot of the time. Although I think he was losing brain cells because of it. When I would read some of his work, there would be more misspellings than usual. He seemed to have trouble with math, and he never did before. He was slowly killing his brain, but he didn't care. This all brings us to a few days ago. As I said at the beginning of this story, Thomas went missing a week ago. Well, most of you probably caught on already, but Thomas was found dead in his car at the bottom of a lake. It would seem his normal ways of controlling almost death didn't cut it for him this time. He took the two first ways he almost died and put them together. Almost dying in his car and almost dying in the water. It felt rather poetic. After I found out my friend died, I didn't know how to feel. I felt guilty for not doing more. And then I realized the second Thomas almost died the first time in that car when he was truly gone. That's when I lost my best friend. Writing went from a hobby to an obsession, an addiction. Something clicked in his head or shook out of place when that damn Subaru flipped. It took my friend and gave me something back that was unrecognizable. He couldn't live in reality anymore. He was only happy in his imaginary land that existed somewhere deep within him. A place I couldn't get to. I miss him dearly. I know he died doing what he loved, but that doesn't make it hurt less. Yesterday, in the midst of my grieving, I made a huge mistake. My curiosity got the better of me. Part of me wanted to see what the hype was all about. Another part of me wanted to feel closer to him. So I did something dumb. I went to the same lake he was found in. I tied one end of a rope to a brick and the other end to my leg. I had a knife in my pocket and I jumped into the water. It was a small brick, so I didn't sink fast, but wow, was I amazed. I could feel the pressure building up in my head. My lungs desperately wanted to take a deep breath, but I held back as long as I could. I reached for the knife in my pocket right after I hit the water, but it felt like a lifetime before the blade reached the rope that was pulling me to my death. I started to cut my way through with all my strength. I started to see flashing in front of my eyes. A moving picture. It was happening. Time was slowing, my mind was sharpening, and ideas flowing. I couldn't resist the urge to try and take a breath any longer. It felt like my body was splitting into two. One part just wanted air, and the other half wanted to stay in the water and keep downloading this idea that was infiltrating my head, even if it meant that it killed me. At that moment, I wanted to live and I wanted to die. The rope broke and I swam to the top. I burst through the water and gasped for air. I got to the edge of the lake and collapsed in exhaustion. I sat looking up at the sky. My heart was pounding and my lungs felt a sense of relief with every deep breath I took. I went home to write down the idea I had and couldn't believe the feeling I had. All I wanted to do was almost die again. Now it's all I can think about. It's not even completely about getting story ideas. I wasn't really struggling with that. But when I was in that water, I don't even know if I can put it into words. It's like something in that water wanted me to die. Like it was taunting me to not live. My body still took over and made sure I lived, but part of me felt okay with dying. I am terrified that this wasn't just the ending to Thomas, but the end of me too. I don't think writers are disturbed or messed up in the head. We aren't psychopaths or serial killers. I think we are just desperate. Desperate for that high of an idea, but please, I beg of you, don't go looking for ideas in desperate places, because one day those ideas will kill you. My grandmother told my father of a story that she experienced when she was a child, who later passed the story down to me when I was a kid. It is a stretch of road just off the freeway west of Bartlesville in northern Oklahoma, where locals talk of dark myths of everything from a demon called Catman that lingers at night to a weird phenomenon called Gravity Hill. But these horrifying myths don't compare to what my grandmother swears is a very real and very tragic story that she experienced growing up. My grandmother was around 8 or 9 years old during the 1950s, when one day her and her 3 friends left the house to go explore and play in the woodlands in Ochelata, OK, which was about a 10-minute drive to a hidden stretch of dirt road at the time called Gap Road. Probably no more than a couple of miles, this piece of road has had an extremely haunting past. During the 1920s, one of Oklahoma's worst incidents took place, which many would know as the Tulsa Race Riots, where innocent Black Americans were murdered. These riots spilled over into the neighboring town of Bartlesville, where many victims were kidnapped and taken to a large ominous tree just off the bend of the main freeway where they were lynched. The official death count my grandmother told my dad was around 16, but she said it could have been as high as 40. While they were playing, they'd worked their way up along the road, all the while blissfully unaware that the road would take them to the site of the massacre. They stopped at the tree where it took place because it stood out from all the others. It was in the middle of the summer, yet there wasn't a single leaf on it. It loomed ominously taller than the other trees and gave off a very negative vibe. One of my grandmother's friends then spotted what looked like a sharpened stick, as if someone had tossed it up towards the tree and it got caught between the branches. He climbed up and tossed it down, and the 4 looked it over before coming to the conclusion that it was probably used to poke the victims as they were strangled to death to see if they were still alive. And when they all died, they tossed it up into the tree only for it to be discovered by them. They made jokes about it, either out of racism or to make light of a dark situation. My grandmother would never tell me which is which when I asked her as a grown man, other than her not wanting to think about it. However, she did tell me one thing led to another, and they all suggested she take it home with her. She agreed, maybe to appear cool in front of her friends. She took it back with her later that night and sat it in her bedroom and went about business as usual until it was time to go to bed. That was when she said the real horror started. She awoke almost past 11 p.m. when she heard the sounds of knocking on her window that came at quick succession 3 times. Tunk, tunk, tunk. She'd pulled the sheets up over her head because she was afraid to look out the window. She peeked lightly just to see the spear where she'd left it leaning against the corner by her bedroom door when she pulled the covers back over. Tunk, tunk, tunk. The knock slightly louder than the last. She got the courage to lower the blanket past her eyes, only to feel her skin grow pale and a pit in her stomach formed. She swore to me, a woman now in her mid to late 70s, that the spear went from leaning against the corner of the room to being on the floor next to her bed with the sharpened end pointing at the window. She didn't even know it moved. Almost as if it had floated when she wasn't looking was how she described it. That whole night she told me that the sounds on the window continued, and periodically the spear would end up somewhere else in her bedroom, and she blamed herself feeling cold mainly on her being very scared. But I wondered later if the haunted and tormented souls were attached to that spear that were still suffering decades later. When the morning came, she told me she didn't wait to get breakfast and raced into town as quick as she could to a payphone in town, where she'd call her friends frantically to come to her house and get the spear. When they arrived confused, she didn't bother explaining to them why she wanted it gone. She doubted they'd believe her anyways, so she told them to take it and throw it into the Caney River. The fear on my grandma's face was enough for them to comply. They took the spear from her bedroom and walked a little further into the woods where the Caney River was and threw the spear in it. Watching it float on down, they left to tell my grandmother that it was gone. She didn't experience anything else like that growing up, but it's a story she told me that made her believe there was something more beyond our realm that made her the superstitious woman she is today. I remember the first time it happened. It's odd coming out of the swirl of sleep and feeling so completely not yourself. I think for a few minutes I just laid there with my eyes closed. I felt heavy and my gut was all blocked up in a way it never had been before. This isn't my ceiling. Had I been picked up and moved somewhere else? Even the sun felt wrong. Glaring at me from the east-facing window out of which I could see the cookie-cutter suburbia not too different from my own home, at least superficially. But everything was rearranged. The grass seemed a different shade. And the road curved all wrong. It was all wrong, all of it. It wasn't that I didn't fit my surroundings. I did. It was clearly my home. The bed I lay in had been slept in so much it had taken in my shape, or at least whoever I was shape. I looked down. I had breasts, which I had never had before. Heavy breasts that sagged and were spotted with age. I was wearing very little, she was wearing very little, just a bra and panties. It didn't turn me on or anything. I don't think it would have had I been beautiful and young and curvy. I felt so female all of a sudden, so old, so revolted by my own body. Am I dreaming? No. Never in any dream had I wondered if I were dreaming. And everything was too tangible, too solid. I got up and made my way to the master bathroom. I stared horrified into that mirror, seeing the ghastly black raisin eyes looking despondently back. My flesh was crawling like 1,000 millipedes were having an orgy under my liver spots and wrinkles. I think in the moment, I understood the plight of those who were born with the wrong gender configuration, those who had definite male souls under the weight of a female body, or vice versa. For me, there was a sense of deep wrongness, a dissonance between the reality of being in this old gray meat sack I so clearly was in, and yet being aware of the distinct and different outline of my soul. I had quite gotten used to being young and, believe me, quite good looking. Oh God, I hope I'm not stuck like this forever. I pulled at my thin lips, I dug my fingernails into my cheek. I could definitely feel that, though in a very detached way. The white imprints of my fingernails remained on my cheek as I pulled away from the mirror. Maybe if I went back to sleep I would wake up and I would have my penis back and everything would be okay. I sat down heavily on the side of the bed. Under the impulse of wanting to return to sleep and out of sheer muscle memory, I felt the body I inhabited open a drawer on the pale blue nightstand next to me and grasp a bottle. As I removed it, it rattled, full of chalky orange pentagons. I took two, dry swallowing them. That was a mistake. They stuck in my old throat and I nearly hacked up blood. I lay there with my eyes closed and let a heavy chemical drowsiness pull me back into dreamland. Seemingly instantly, I awoke and I was back in my own body. My girlfriend hovering over me, her face taut with worry. Apparently, I had been sporadically twitching in my sleep and had been completely unresponsive for like 15 minutes, she said, my heart barely even beating. She had been about to call 911, she said. At the time, I just shrugged it off as an odd dream, even though my memory of the few minutes I spent as a fat old woman was more vivid than any dream I'd ever had. I think I had no other way to rationalize the experience. The second time, several weeks later, it was worse. I opened my eyes to a prison cell on a cot next to a piss-filled toilet with a guard screaming at me to get the fuck out of bed and put on my fucking pants. I spent the morning and subsequent day just following the habits of the body I was in. I found out my name was Hector. Apparently he had done something particularly nasty, as Hector did not seem to have any friends. No one sat with him at any meals. I became conscious of the looks of disgust that would flit across other guys' faces when I met eyes. Later in a bathroom, still in a daze, I felt someone grab my hair and slam my head against the nearest urinal. Pain was an odd sensation. The tickle of blood trickling down my cheek and the hot, throbbing agony of a forehead wound seemed distant. Not really mine to experience. I turned around and stared straight at the chest hair of some obscenely tall skinhead. "Hey, asshole," he said and punched me in the stomach. "You think you can just fuck a little kid like that? Huh, asshole, I heard you cooked and ate him after it. He must have been pretty fucking young if you could fit him in a pot and boil him like that. Hey, you fucking cunt, you pig." He grabbed my head, a handful of Hector's stringy black hair, and bashed it on the cold porcelain several more times. Even in here we have standards. "Asshole, you think you can mingle with us all, huh? Like we're equals, huh? Puta. Bitch, I want to kill you, but I won't yet. I think I'll just scramble your brains a little." I was losing consciousness. An angry face swam formless and abstract in my vision. My head hid the urinal again, extra hard this time. Everything went dark. I woke in my bed, alone, with my head throbbing. It was around 4 o'clock or so. Later that night, under the haze of painkillers, I tried to look up any Hectors that may have been arrested for heinous, hideous things. I found several, and one looked just like me. Just like me in the dream, or whatever it was I'd gone through. Hector de la Cruz. The news report said he had been brutally assaulted in a prison bathroom, hospitalized, and had ultimately passed away. It seemed like the angry skinhead had not kept his word. A chill ran down my spine as I read the article. That had been me for a few hours, or at least I think it had been. I remembered being an old woman, no longer thinking it was a dream. I wondered if it would happen again to me. I desperately hoped it wouldn't. I wondered if I should see a doctor. Ultimately, I didn't. What would I have even said? I spent a whole day as an assembly line worker in Asia. At the break of dawn, I was shunted out of bed by my irritating and anxious wife. I did not understand the language. I was poked and prodded into getting on a train and following a horde of people to a gray factory. There were nets all along its perimeter about 3/4 of the way up the walls. I wondered if they were there to stop people from jumping off the roof. I tried to hide and curl into a ball because I didn't know where to go or what to do. I was quickly found out and dragged to my feet by a man with a white-collared shirt and a greasy comb-over. I was told quite a few things in what could have been Mandarin or Taiwanese or Vietnamese or Korean. I wondered if I had hurt the social standing of the man whose body I was inhabiting. Eventually, I was made to understood that all I had to do was put this metal cylinder into this tube and press this rubber ring into it to make a seal, which is what I did until long past nightfall. Until an electronic bell rang out and everyone cleared out and swept me out in a matter of minutes. I ended up collapsing on the side of the road, and what happened to the poor factory worker, I don't know. That was when it began in earnest. My little adventures, or excursions. I went so many odd and mundane places, taking over so many people's lives for a day. It often ended so poorly, too. I got hit by a man on a red motorcycle once while I was crossing the road. At the time, I was inhabiting a little third grader. I survived the initial impact mostly because the man had tried to swerve, though I lay bleeding from a deep stomach wound. I remember looking up at the grisly trail of gore that led up to the man intimately meshed and mangled together with the remains of his red motorcycle. The handlebars had pierced his chest and poked out the back of his bloody shirt, and his legs were all twisted up in the wheels. It's not something one forgets so easily. In my body and my little life, I was not doing so well. I was miserable being myself, my grades were slipping, and my girlfriend had refused to sleep in the same bed as me after the first time. Apparently, I had traumatized her. It was too creepy. She said how I'd lay with my eyes rolling around and around in their sockets, convulsing slightly. Unresponsive, nearly comatose, she said. We broke up pretty soon after as I was becoming increasingly erratic, prone to sleeping all day and never calling or texting her. That's the worst part. My memories. Forgetting who even was me. Being taken over by so many different strangers. Taking over so many bodies. I lose track of who I had been, when, and what I had been doing in what body. They all jumble together now in my head. As I pass from person to person, I wish I could forget, but that seems to be all I am now. Memories, even as I forget the details of my childhood. The face of my mother and father. I think I inhabit my original body less and less. And when I do, I don't remember it as me. I'm just another face in the blur of faces. I don't mind it so much, I suppose. I never was anyone in the first place. Just another person in a sea of people. These lives I take over, often ruin. I know they're real now, or at least as real as a thing can be. As real as the words I'm writing on an old typewriter I found in my dusty basement. I'm old now and have breasts again, though not nearly so large as the first time around. It's not so bad being a woman. I even experienced a period once. It wasn't so bad. I find myself nodding off slightly. I think I'll fall asleep soon. It started as an innocent ritual, a quirky habit meant to pass the time. But habits, like shadows, can sometimes grow into something darker. Max had always been a creature of routine. Every night after dinner, he would pour a handful of M&Ms into a small wooden bowl and begin his game. He called it the gauntlet. 2 candies would face off between his thumb and forefinger, the weaker one cracking under the pressure. He'd savor the defeated, leaving the unbroken one to fight another round. The last M&M standing was always crowned the champion. That champion would be meticulously wrapped in tissue paper, placed in a small box, and sent off to the M&M's headquarters with the same handwritten note, "Use this M&M for breeding purposes." At first it was a joke. He never expected a response. But then one day he got one. A plain white envelope appeared in his mailbox, unmarked except for his name scrawled in blocky, uneven letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message typed in an unsettlingly formal tone. "Thank you for your contribution. We have received your champion. We look forward to more entries in the future." Max laughed it off, chalking it up to a bored employee humoring his eccentricity. Yet, as the weeks went by, something about the letter lingered in his mind. There was no signature, no contact information, just that chillingly vague acknowledgement. The next time he bought M&Ms, he noticed something strange. The candies felt different, slightly heavier, the shells smoother. When he resumed his ritual, the first two M&Ms he squeezed didn't crack. He applied more pressure, his fingers turning white with the effort. Still neither broke. Frustrated, he hurled them onto the table, where they rolled to a stop side by side. As he stared, he swore he saw them twitch. Just a tiny, imperceptible movement. He laughed nervously, convincing himself it was a trick of the light. But the unease stayed with him. Over the next few nights, the M&Ms grew even stranger. They no longer broke under pressure. Instead, they seemed to push back, resisting his fingers. One night, as he held two between his thumb and forefinger, he felt a sharp pain, a tiny piercing jab. He yelped, dropping the candies. Blood welled from a pinpoint cut on his finger. Inspecting the fallen M&Ms, he saw nothing unusual at first. But when he leaned closer, he noticed faint hairline cracks spidering across their surfaces. From within the cracks, something glimmered, a metallic sheen like tiny, sharp teeth. The final straw came when he received another envelope. This time, it wasn't typed. The note was scrawled in an erratic, almost frantic hand. "Stop, they're learning." Max stared at the note, his heart pounding. He tore open the pantry door, dumping the remaining M&Ms onto the counter. They lay there, motionless, innocuous in their bright candy shells. He grabbed a hammer from the garage and smashed one with all his might. The shell cracked, revealing not chocolate, but a writhing black mass that oozed and pulsed like a living thing. Panicked, Max swept the candies into a bag and drove to the nearest dumpster, tossing them in. But even as he drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. That night, he dreamed of tiny, skittering shapes with hard shells and sharp teeth, crawling out of the dumpster and making their way back to him. When he woke, his wooden bowl was back on the counter, filled to the brim with M&Ms. Day 1, 2013. I was sent to war to fight against them. I'm on the plane, heading to the battlefield. I don't even know what we're fighting or if I'll survive. We're arriving soon. Day 19, 2013. I still don't know what we're fighting. It's huge and pitch black, absorbing all light. It stands 8 feet tall. Send help, we need it. They kill my friends. I just hope that I get out, but death is peace compared to this. Yet I will fight for our country. Day 70, 2013. We're getting closer to victory, or so they say. But we're losing so many. We've started calling them sighty. They're monsters with long, scaly arms and razor-sharp claws that slice through our armor like it's paper. When they hit us, our organs spill out. This isn't war. It's torture. Day 150, 2013. The sighty have become aggressive. No longer do they attack in their little groups of 20 or 30. They swarm hundreds on hundreds, pressing against our defenses until they crack. Whenever we make a gain, they simply counter with a tide of numbers. I've lost count of the number of good men who've fallen. It's no longer about winning any battles, it's about trying to stay alive. And the fear, always there. There's hardly a moment to sleep before they are on us once more. Day 247, 2013. Everything is falling apart. We've started retreating. The Siddhi are pushing us back, taking more ground every day. We've lost millions. Even nukes do nothing to them. The sergeant says surrender isn't an option. He told us, they've killed us already, but we'll fight. Fight for our lives, for our families. I miss my sweet daughter. Day 300, 2013. The sky is black with smoke and the reek of death. The battlefield stretched to infinity, bodies, twisted wreckage, gunfire. I have lost count of friends now, there have been so many. The Scythe simply kept on coming, inexorable, eyes like fire. It felt like it would never stop, ever. I am tired, just so tired. I do not know how much longer I can carry this on. Day 377, 2014, I returned home. War has engulfed the cities now. My family, they're dead. My wife was clutching our daughter huddled in the closet. But Scythe found them, ripped them to pieces. There's no secret war anymore. Now what? Day 420, 2014. We are forced deeper into hostile territory. The Siddhi never seem to end, they just keep coming and coming. It has become a day-to-day, hour-to-hour sight of watching comrades fall. The blood never seems to end. I'm scared that we might not last through another night. Food and water are running out, ammo's almost spent. It would seem we've already lost. I can't get my family out of my head. I just want to go home. Day 490, 2014. We are down to 10 men now. The Scythe are everywhere, closing in from every direction. We are trapped. We have made our stand in what once was a small town, but this feels like defeat. Supplies are gone and options are all exhausted. Fear clings in the thick air. The sound of roars grows louder in the distance. We know they're coming for us again. I sit here thinking about my daughter, her laughter, the way she used to run up to me with that big smile. I don't know if I'll ever see her again. The others, they're scared too, but no one says it aloud. We're just waiting, preparing for the final charge. They'll come for us and we'll give them everything we have left. But this isn't just a fight for survival anymore. It's a fight to ensure that some part of humanity can live on after we're gone. We've already lost our world. Now we're just trying to protect whatever's left. There's a quiet resolve settling in among the men. We'll fight until the very end. Last year, the clouds came. Humanity gazed upward as dense red formations accumulated above us. Immediately, people took it as a sign of the end times, but were quickly dismissed as the rain the clouds produced didn't have any distinguishing qualities. It was just rain. No blood fell from the sky, no acid, and no concoction turning us into horrible monsters from a 1980s horror flick. The rain seemed to be harmless, and the clouds were gone the next day. The news just echoed the reports that meteorologists and experts were stumped at what caused the clouds to appear or why they were colored in such an odd way. It turned into a meme for about a month, and everyone had all but forgotten them by the end of last summer. Around the end of the year, however, as all of the leaves started falling off the trees and plant life began to wither away for the winter, bright red spherical flowers, roughly the size of tennis balls, began sprouting where fields of grass and forests had been before. Everywhere you went, you could see these flowers bloom. Folks quickly started making the connection to the red clouds, and statements by world governments advised everyone to avoid the flowers as best they could, as more research was necessary before a conclusion could be made. Panic started to set in from the masses. Conspiracy theorists claimed this was planned by our governments and the flowers would produce spores that would make us more subservient. The religious claimed it was a sign of end times and to prepare for the second coming. Others claimed it was extraterrestrials taking their first step in terraforming our planet for their incoming invasion. Maybe they all had some sort of truth. Maybe they all couldn't be further from it. I still don't know. The media and our elected officials stayed quiet, which of course didn't help the ever-growing theories on the matter and the government's involvement. Around December, the flowers were blooming everywhere you looked. Entire countrysides were now painted red with the sprawling vines and buds of these flowers. The new plant life began overtaking all other flora wherever they grew, like an extremely aggressive invasive species. Finally, our governments couldn't slap band-aid statements on this ever-growing phenomenon anymore. Task forces were dispatched and began burning operations to remove the flowers, but for every square mile burned, 10 more would just as quickly turn bright red with the flowers' bloom. Things started turning more insidious once herbivores started eating the flowers as their normal food sources were all but snuffed out. The herbivores who ate the flowers had a rapid change in demeanor and would quickly run to find a secluded place where they would lie still for days before a guaranteed demise. Predators and scavengers took advantage of the easy meal, only to meet the same fate. Insects, fungus, worms, and bacteria would all consume the body like they had done for their entire genetic history, and then they too would wither and die. As farming became impossible, and the cattle and livestock either died out or became malnourished, food shortages became our next problem. Many died in riots and famine over the next few months. I guess they were the lucky ones. I had been dealing with the recent death of my mother, who lived in a farmhouse in the countryside of Virginia. My father passed away years ago, which left the house to me. Looking back, I'm appreciative that they didn't have to witness what was to come. I wanted to sell the property, but obviously, no one had buying a house on their mind at a time like this. After receiving an alert to stay indoors on my cell phone, I decided to return to my old home near Washington, D.C., thinking it would be safer. I arrived in February to my childhood home covered in bright crimson red. I had grown somewhat accustomed to the world being covered in red by this point, but I'd be lying if it didn't bring me sadness to see the property in this state. Likewise, the chickens and cattle my parents had raised were all gone. A few of their bodies lay rotting, cloaked in red decay by the edge of the forest behind the house. Days, weeks, and months passed. I spent my time watching the news and tried to stock up on as much food and supplies as I could. The nights became quiet. I'd go days without even seeing a car drive down the road. I started to feel as though something was watching me in the darkness of the night, just outside the tree line where the moon could not reflect the red glow of the flowers in the fields. I attributed it to solitude and paranoia, but I could never shake the feeling. I've always been one to prefer being alone. I worked for a small tech company that didn't require us to go into any office, so outside of the occasional Zoom meeting here and there, I never really talked to anyone. I never thought I'd miss being around others as much as I did at this time. April arrived, and the temperature started to rise with it. I think we had all been secretly hoping these red flowers were simply a seasonal phenomenon and would die in concession with our normal plant life returning in the spring. It never happened. In fact, the red flowers just grew ever more dense, and in late April they began producing their own form of some twisted pollen. You couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of you on a bright spring day. The smell it produced was like that of both iron and sulfur and left a rancid taste in your mouth. The news began calling this red pollen the red murk. On the third night of the new bloom is when I heard them. I awoke in the middle of the night to wailing screams in the distance. I lived in the countryside, but was within walking distance of a small town where I had been buying my groceries and supplies. I opened my curtains and cracked open the window of my room to peer outside, but was met with nothing but blackness and the sounds of men, women, and children screaming in the distance. I could not tell if the screams were from agony, fear, or a mixture of the two. But it sent a dreadful chill down my spine. I sat frozen next to my window as my heart raced, and a heavy pit in my stomach started to weigh me down, just listening and feeling helpless to whatever was happening. I was terrified that whatever was making those people scream would come for me next. I realized I had not even noticed the cloud of red spores that had entered my home while the window was cracked. I quickly shut the window, which only muffled the screams in the distance. I rushed to turn on my TV to check the news, but all that would appear was a never-ending loading screen as the TV tried to connect to the internet. I went to find my phone to see what the hell was going on and was met with a new emergency alert notification stating, "Emergency alert. Highly aggressive unidentified creatures reported across multiple states. Shelter in place. Lock all doors and windows. Authorities are responding." Before I could even process what I was reading, a loud knock at the door had broken my concentration. David, it's Ryan, please." I recognized the voice to be my parents' neighbor, Ryan, and was given a fleeting moment of relief. Ryan was about 10 years older than me, and I had spoken with him briefly in the past, but never more than a short small-talk conversation here and there. I opened the door to see Ryan, his wife Trish, and their son Nate, who couldn't have been older than 10. Ryan and his family quickly rushed inside. "What's going on out there?" I asked as I brought them into the living room. Ryan and his wife Trish were both in a panic, yet their son was practically frozen, just staring off into the distance. Ryan told me he was awoken to the screaming as well, but realized his son Nate had gone out the front door for some reason. When he and his wife Trish rushed to go find him, they found him standing in the road in front of my house. In a panic, they rushed here. Ryan's sentence trailed off to a mumble. I put on a face of false confidence and offered to let Ryan and his family sleep here for the night. Trish took Nate to bed, but Ryan stayed with me. I realized at about this time that the screaming had stopped. After Trish and Nate had left the room and Ryan had a second to calm down, he looked over to me and said, "I didn't want to scare Nate, but I saw something out there. It looked like some sort of insect or a spider. It was just watching him from outside the fog." "An insect?" I responded. "How big was it?" Ryan looked like he had been shaken to his core. "Big, like the size of a large dog or a deer." I could just see its silhouette at the edge of the darkness, looking right at Nate, and I could almost swear it sounded like my voice was coming from it, just lower and broken. Ryan kept trailing off in his sentences and seemed like he was trying to make sense of it all himself. By the time Trish and I grabbed Nate, your house was closer to us than ours, so we ran this way, Ryan said. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us just overwhelmed and afraid. I walked Ryan to the room where I had led Trish and their son to rest. Trish was lying on her side, holding her son in her arms and stroking his hair. I could tell she had been crying, but I didn't feel like I knew her well enough to say anything. The boy, on the other hand, looked almost unbothered, and just continued staring off into the distance. I didn't get any sleep that night. After receiving the emergency alert, both my cell service and internet connection stopped working. I quickly realized how much I had been relying on my phone to bring me comfort over the past few months. But now I had no way of knowing what was going on. No connection to the outside world. The next day I awoke to my power cutting out. I walked outside to find the red murk was less dense, but it brought me no solace, for now I could once again see the sky. As I gazed upward, my heart was filled with dread as thick red clouds covered Earth's atmosphere. Ryan and his family stayed at my house for a few weeks. I was honestly happy to have the company after being isolated for so long. We stayed inside and rationed our food carefully. Eventually, however, my supplies began to run dry. Ryan and I decided we should try and head into town to see if we could find any supplies or someone to help us. Trish objected and was able to convince Ryan to stay at the house. I left my front porch for the first time in months. Luckily, the red murk had cleared up enough that I could at least see where I was going. The walk into town was eerie, the silence so heavy it felt like a weight pressing down on me. I scanned the empty streets, hoping for any sign of life. A bird, a squirrel, even a distant voice. But there was nothing. Just the oppressive quiet and that unsettling feeling of being watched. A prickling awareness that something waited. Just beyond the red-stained fog. I was able to make my way into an old Walgreens that had been abandoned. It was at about this time I realized I should have done some research on what type of medicine would be useful in a scenario such as this. Then again, what research could I have done with no internet? Walgreens wasn't teeming with fresh, nutritious food, especially not any that hadn't completely rotted with red mold anyway. I grabbed as many items of food and medicine as I could before quickly heading out. As I walked out of town, the sound of my steps reverberated through the streets. Fear began to take hold of my body. It wasn't fear like I had ever really felt before. It was more primal than that, like I was experiencing for the first time what it was like to be on the bottom of the food chain. With no phone, no gun, no car, or no sort of human technology to keep me safe as it had humankind for thousands of years, I was completely alone. Whatever I felt watching me from just outside the red murk, I could feel that it was hungry. I don't know if it was simply paranoia or a sixth sense from an age where humans were at the same level of disadvantage, but I knew from the deepest part of my physical body that I was not safe. I began picking up the pace as I tried to get back home as quickly as possible. I can't be certain, but my eyes were darting back and forth as I ran towards silhouettes of something slowly stalking my path just outside the fog. As I ran down the road, I saw what looked like the silhouette of a person on my right who had not been there on my way in. Relieved to see another human, I slowed down and began to approach the person who I could now tell was sitting on their knees in an almost yoga-like position with their back turned toward me on the side of the road. "Hello?" I quivered. My words echoed in the fog like I was in a small cave. "Are you okay?" I asked as I kept my distance, but continued to walk around the person to see their face. As I walked around this person, I began to make out through the red murk a young man no older than 17. His mouth agape and his eyes bleeding from their sockets. All up and down the parts of his body I could see were red bulbs the size of golf balls. Some of them were broken like something had hatched out of them. I took only one step closer as morbid curiosity overcame my fear. The boy was silent but twitching every few seconds and made a guttural hiccup sound with each twitch. It was at about this time I noticed small creatures that looked like an uncanny mix of both crustacean and arachnid. They were roughly the size of quarters with long red legs and a round black abdomen. They all had misshapen pincers near the front of their body like a crab with some sort of deformity. They crawled up and down the boy's body and in and out of his nose and mouth. I could hear some of them moving under his clothes, and they emanated a short and faint clicking sound as they scurried around. Small pieces of his flesh were missing, as though they had been using his still-living carcass for both incubation and food. I could feel myself getting ready to vomit, but the feeling of needing to run home was stronger. The next few minutes were a blur of animalistic focus to get indoors as quickly as possible. It wasn't until I ran through my front door and an air of safety washed over me that I began to feel guilt. I left that poor boy to suffer an unimaginable fate, and I didn't even think to save him until I was safe and inside. As I quickly closed the door behind me and began considering the horror I just witnessed, I didn't even notice Ryan and Trish waiting in the foyer. I stood there shaking, staring at the ground. My mind was filled with thoughts, but I didn't say a word. still not noticing Ryan and Trish. "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" asked Ryan. Just now realizing they were standing there, I jumped in fear. I dropped the supplies on the ground and walked to the upstairs bathroom where I began to vomit. I sat on the bathroom floor for the rest of the day. The image of that boy's broken face burned into my eyes. I didn't get much sleep after that, the feeling of both horror and guilt keeping me up into the late hours of the night. At this time of year in Virginia, the heat started to become unbearable, another painful reminder of our reliance on technology. We kept the windows closed for obvious reasons, which made the house a humid hellhole. I was always one to keep the AC at about 68 degrees or so sleeping at what felt like no lower than 89 degrees on top of the fear, paranoia, and guilt made meaningful rest nearly impossible. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the moonlight peered through my curtains, filling my room with an off-red glow, I was startled by the sound of a horrible scream coming from Ryan and Trish's room. I jumped out of bed and ran straight to where they had been sleeping. My heart sank as I opened the door and was greeted by the sight of Ryan holding a gun, pointing it in my general direction, with his family cowering behind him. Standing between Ryan's family and me was a creature shaped like some sort of stingray with long, flat, thin limbs that looked way too small for its large winged head. The creature stood about a foot taller than me and had a long pointed tail like a scorpion. The creature's head shook in what seemed to be some sort of intimidation display as its long pointed tail raised higher and higher, while vibrating back and forth pointing towards Ryan and his family. As the tail vibrated, I noticed it made almost the exact same noise as a rattlesnake. The next thing I knew, I heard a gunshot that made my ears ring. Growing up on a farm, I was no stranger to firearms and the sound they made when the trigger was pulled, but I was so focused on the strangeness of the creature, I wasn't expecting it. The creature didn't shriek like monsters do in the movies. It was high-pitched, sure, but it almost sounded more like an injured dog yelping in pain. The creature immediately fell to the ground, writhing in agony as it began to bleed its bright red blood all over the carpet, its sharp-pointed tail flailing everywhere. After a few seconds, it took its last breath and deflated dead on the floor. It was around this time I looked toward the window on the other side of the room, which had been left cracked open not even 2 inches. We made sure to leave the windows closed after that night. I was somewhat upset that Ryan brought a gun into my home without telling me. Granted, I was glad he had it at that moment, but I started to feel like my hospitality was being taken advantage of. On the other hand, the last thing I wanted was to be alone. After much thought, I decided to confront Ryan about the gun. He was sitting at my kitchen table reading an old book my dad kept around about the Korean War. "Hey, can I talk to you?" I asked somewhat hesitantly. "Yeah, sure, of course," Ryan responded, closing the book and setting it to the side of the table. "Look, I don't have a problem with you having a gun, but between that and the window being left open, I feel like we need to have a little more communication here." The volume of my voice trailed off. I was never good with confrontation, so this was exceedingly uncomfortable for me. "I know, I'm sorry, but just for me and my family's safety, I thought it was best. As for the window, I told Trish we couldn't open it, but I guess Nate got the idea at some point in the night, but I'm sorry." Ryan responded, "It's all right, I just wish that, like, you would have been a little more forward about it. I guess." I responded almost to a mumble near the end of my sentence. "Look, we can't thank you enough for all you've done for us. Letting us stay here together, going into town to get supplies, and going through what you saw. We are all so appreciative, but at the end of the day, all that matters to me is keeping my family safe. Not to mention, if anything, you should be thanking me, especially with what's out there." Ryan's tone abruptly shifted from apologetic to frustrated and almost downright angry as he spoke. I was almost hurt by his words. I mean, I understood what he was saying, but I now felt like an outsider in my own home, fending for myself as strangers shared my food, water, and shelter. I sat back in my chair and just nodded my head towards Ryan. We sat awkwardly in silence for a few minutes before Ryan got up to leave. As I sat at the table in my kitchen, I thought back to what Ryan said about Nate opening the window. What was he opening the window for? One would assume to let some air in, but I was brought back to memories of the night Ryan and his family arrived. I remember him saying he heard some sort of creature in the darkness calling from his very own voice. My mind wandered as I sat at the table, considering all of the horrible possibilities. As the weeks passed, we continued to hear more and more creatures just outside the house. They would moan and screech and scutter through the red foliage outside our walls. a terrifying reminder of how thin our layer of protection really was. At night, I continued to think of the boy sitting on the side of the road, of the voice calling to Nate, the creature that broke into my house not long ago. Are humans really this ill-equipped to survive without the use of any type of machines or technology? Ryan may have broken my trust, but he was right about one thing. Who knows what would have happened if he didn't have that gun? My mind then wandered to what it must be like to be an insect or a small creature living on the ocean floor. I remember seeing a documentary once about wasps that would lay eggs in still-living caterpillars. The eggs would hatch, and the larvae would eat their way out of the caterpillar's still-living body. It seems like the horror of that microscopic world is one that we now live in, one that was always right outside the comfy embrace of our safe, air-conditioned front door. My thoughts kept circling back to one singular question. What could have laid its eggs in that boy? As more time passed, all hope for being saved faded away. We had to begin being more strict with the rationing of our supplies. I refused to go back into town, especially alone. Trish and Ryan, of course, would not volunteer themselves. Some contention started arising between Ryan's family and I. I barely talked to Trish, and Ryan seemed weary of me, like he didn't trust me. Meanwhile, he continued to drink my water and feed his family with the food I had saved up. We never argued or anything like that, but it seems our air of trust had been broken ever since he shot that creature in his room. As I was scouring the pantry one night, looking for anything that could be consumed, just outside the wall, I could have sworn I heard Ryan's voice calling out. I was worried and confused because the other side of this wall led to my backyard, where the tree line that guards a forest sits about 30 yards from my back door. "Ryan?" I yelled. "Yeah, everything okay?" Ryan responded from what sounded like the living room. Nothing. Sorry. Thought I heard you say something." I responded, confused. A few minutes passed and Trish came rushing down the stairs. "Where's Nate?" she asked Ryan. "I thought he was with you." Ryan responded, scared of the next words to come out of her mouth. As I walked toward the stairs, I looked toward the back door, which had been left open, letting a cloud of red fog into the house. The three of us darted toward the back door, led by Trish. I grabbed my flashlight on the way out. The red murk was thin, but the moon was nowhere to be found, so we relied on the light of my flashlight as we looked for Nate in the backyard. As we called out to him, we heard what sounded like crying from the tree line. The sound was identical to Nate's voice. I pointed my flashlight at the area from which the sound was coming to see Nate with his hands over his eyes. He barely moved. Even though he was sobbing, his mouth didn't twitch or open or close at all. Trish ran straight for him without a second thought, followed by Ryan and then me. Trish ran to Nate, squatted down, and began trying to pick him up. I noticed she struggled for a second and seemed confused about why she couldn't lift the small boy. I raised the round light of my flashlight upwards a few inches as I realized the sound of crying was actually coming from further into the forest itself, and not where Nate was supposedly standing. Ryan, who was standing behind me, began moving towards them both. Just as Ryan let out a sigh of relief over finding Nate, the large abdomen of an insect-like creature no shorter than 30 feet long and 20 feet tall whipped forward. The bottom of its thorax had been pointed up to the sky until now, unnoticed by us as it was camouflaged to look like shrubs and small trees that had been colored a subtle red to match its environment. Two large pincers darted toward Trish from either side of the flashlight's round illumination and clamped her by the waist and right below her neck. The creature's legs, which I now realized were made to look like the bark of long, thin trees, began to slowly stand up. In a matter of seconds, I understood this creature had been there the entire time we had been outside, waiting for the perfect moment. As the creature rose, it pulled back its tail into the dark forest behind it. At that moment, I realized the tip of its tail had somehow either perfectly camouflaged itself to look exactly like Nate, or had used the child's corpse as a lure to get his mother out of the house. I moved my flashlight upward in disbelief as I stared, dumbfounded, at the behemoth. The sound of Nate's crying voice was still transmitting from the creature as it pulled Trish roughly 20 feet into the air and began to engorge itself on her body, starting at the side of her neck. Its head resembled a praying mantis, but its mandibles were wrong. They jutted out from its jaw like fleshy red tentacles, twitching unnervingly, pulling pieces of Trish's flesh into its mouth where smaller, more rigid mandibles did the chewing. Red blood started to drip down onto the ground as it rolled off the creature's clamped pincers, trapping her in place by her waist and upper body. I stood frozen in fear once again, as the woman who had lived in my home for months was eaten alive by this creature. Looking back, I think I was most disturbed by how innocently uncaring the creature looked. Although it was a horrible abomination, it harbored no ill will. It was simply consuming energy. Trish's family, life, hopes, and dreams, it all meant nothing to it. She was simply food. I think that somehow felt worse than something that hated or felt anger towards us, something that we as humans could understand. Its large oval eyes even darted around from side to side, independently of one another, as though it itself had to be on the lookout for predators while it ate. I stared in horror as Trish's lifeless body was torn apart one chunk at a time by the creature's maw. It all must have been about 8 seconds before my shock was broken by a blood-curdling scream finally let out by Ryan, but there was nothing here I could do. I snapped out of it and quickly ran to Ryan, grabbing him and attempting to drag him inside. My flashlight quickly jetted from side to side as I tried to grab him. In the illumination of my flashlight, I caught a short glimpse of dozens of eyes of varying sizes glowing from the reflection of the light at the cusp of the red murk, which had begun to grow thicker in the few short minutes we had been outside. The creatures sitting and staring from the red void would without a doubt make us their next meal if it weren't for the giant organism just a few feet from us, which was currently consuming Ryan's still living wife. I was able to drag Ryan inside as he angrily and mournfully sobbed into my shoulder. Once inside, he pushed me away and ran upstairs. I didn't chase him, yet another thing I now feel guilty about, but I had a new horrific image burned into my mind. Ryan returned with the gun he had used to kill the stingray-like creature. I understood at the time, but maybe I was too afraid to stop him. I knew what horrors awaited us out there, and like I did nothing. I sat on the floor thinking about the image of Trish being eaten by something none of us could even comprehend. Ryan swung open the back door and started firing into the tree line. It was pitch black outside, but I could hear the creature grumble and move as its large but slender legs broke down smaller trees and retreated, meal in hand, into the forest. Ryan fired around 5 or 6 shots, then slumped down to his knees, dropping the gun. I finally mustered the courage to stand up and try to calm Ryan once again and bring him inside. As I took my first step toward the back door, a long mucus-covered appendage struck Ryan in the back of the head, originating from somewhere above him and out of sight. He immediately slumped over, paralyzed, as the appendage still stuck to him pulled him upward. His frozen body faced toward me as his back folded over his legs, twisting his body. All he could move were his eyes, which locked with mine. The anger that overtook him all but a short few moments ago was gone. All I saw was fear and sadness in his eyes. Ryan was then pulled away from my view to God knows what sort of fate. I quickly closed the door as fast as I could and fell to the floor. My mind was filled with the thoughts of a whole family gone in the blink of an eye to the horrors outside of my very home. I didn't get any sleep that night either. The next day, I gathered up enough bravery to quickly grab the gun Ryan left behind on my back porch. The red murk was the thickest I had ever seen. The gun was not but a few feet from my door, but I could barely find it between the overwhelming fear and the red fog that filled the outside air. The red murk smelled particularly horrible that day. On top of sulfur and iron, it gave an unholy aroma of putrid decay. A few weeks have passed. I was proud of my rationing abilities, but that meant I had gone days without eating more than once. I'm scared to look in the mirror. I don't know if I'd even recognize the person staring back. I know I have a long beard now, and that my hair has grown down below my neckline. I don't want to see the scared, shameful creature that I've become. I can hear them outside now as I'm writing this. It's only a matter of time before they find a way in or decide just to break down a window or door. Some are larger than the creature that took Trish. One sounded so gargantuan its steps shook the house like an earthquake. The noises it emitted sounded like whales calling of all things. At night, I swear I hear Ryan's voice calling my name from the edge of the forest. I know it's not him. One day recently, I saw Ryan's split-open carcass about 20 yards from my back porch. His lifeless form wrapped in red decay near where the cows my parents once raised used to roam. I'm almost out of water now, so I guess this is it. I checked the gun Ryan left behind, and of course, there's only one bullet left. Seems poetic almost. I don't know why I'm writing this. I was hoping it would bring me some sort of comfort or a way to put things in perspective, but all it's done is made me relive the horrors of the last year. So I guess these are my final words. I'm not going back outside. I won't be a part of the food chain. There's one bullet left. I am a security contractor for tree plantations in South Africa, and I have some stories that I think you might enjoy hearing about. For some background, I've been working in the security industry for about 15 years, with 9 of those spent working in and around plantations. My job primarily involves securing these vast, isolated areas from the occasional would-be thief. Yes, people really do try to steal trees, and from illegal miners who try to set up their operations on our land. It's not your typical security work, and the work itself is dangerous. Anyways, with that out the way, I will get into a few of my stories. Story number 1. It was just past 1 a.m. when we received an alert from our control room. One of our units had spotted an individual entering the plantation. Now, we're no strangers to these calls. Guys often try to break in, heavily armed with AK-47s and R4 rifles. It's dangerous work, but we're used to it. So, as the area manager, I headed out to back up my officers. When I arrived, I was met by the 2 guards stationed at this particular plantation. They were understandably shaken. They told me they had seen a single individual walking amongst the trees, heading up a path that led up the mountain. It was a remote area, dense with trees, and the chances of an armed encounter were high. I sent the 2 guards around to the opposite side of the mountain in case the person decided to run. I made my way up the mountain alone, guided only by my flashlight. This was a few years ago before we had night vision or drones, so it was just me in the dark. I began scanning the tree line, trying to catch any movement. That's when I saw it. At first I thought my eyes were just fucking with me, but no, it was a person, or at least it looked like one. This thing was unnaturally thin, but its face really shook me up. It had 2 small dots where its eyes should have been, but no mouth, no nose, just an empty, featureless face. I shouted at it, "Don't you fucking move, motherfucker." But it didn't listen. It just turned and started walking away like it hadn't heard a word I said. I radioed to the guards on the other side of the mountain, letting them know what I'd seen. They should have been able to get there quickly. It would have taken anyone only about 8 or 9 minutes to reach the area. But when they called back, they said they hadn't found anything. No trace, no sign of anyone or anything. We brought in a K9 to search for any scent trail, hoping for something, anything that could explain what I'd seen. But the trail ended. Suddenly, and without explanation. I'll be honest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The guards didn't believe me. They thought I'd been seeing things. The K9 handler, though he found the whole thing strange, refused to believe my story too. But I know what I saw, and to this day, I can't shake the memory of that thing. Story number 2. This incident took place at another plantation we protect. It's not as active as the others and more like a guest house now. I was in the area at a residential property doing a routine site check with a trainee I had been paired with when our control room alerted us to a positive break-in. This only happens when the cameras detect someone on site, and given the crimes that take place in rural areas, we don't take these calls lightly. My trainee and I immediately headed out. The guards on site were clueless to the alert, which pissed me off. This plantation is located in a mountainous area, and the fog that night was thick. We checked with the control room which camera pole was set off. Each camera pole has a designated number, making it easy to locate and coordinate where a potential intruder was. These poles are only placed along the perimeter of a property. I told the guards to stay put and keep an eye on things while my trainee and I moved toward the far side of the property. The sense of unease was building, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The fog made it harder to see, but we kept moving towards the direction the camera pole was located at. As we got closer, we began hearing something strange. At first it sounded like the wind, but then I realized it was screaming, manic, desperate. And the worst part, it didn't sound like it was coming from a single direction. It was all around us. Above, below, to the left, to the right. The screaming echoed through the dense fog. It repeated over and over again, getting louder and more frantic. At that moment, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something was wrong. It didn't take a genius to realize this wasn't a normal situation. I assumed we were walking into an ambush. I raised my rifle and we froze, listening for any movement. But the screaming kept going, like a loop, frantic and unrelenting. I immediately radioed back to our control room. Check the heat signatures at pole 035G. Are we still reading anything on site? I gave our exact location, hoping for confirmation that this wasn't just a mistake. The response came back cold. 478 Central, negative, no signatures. No heat signatures. Nothing. That sent a chill down my spine. The screaming continued, but we couldn't see anything, nor could the control room. I told my trainee, trying to keep my voice steady, "Get the fuck out of here." We didn't waste any time. We bolted back to the vehicle and indeed did. Get the fuck out of there. I couldn't get that scream out of my head. A week later, the trainee who had been with me that night handed in his resignation. He didn't say much, just left. We never spoke about the incident again. To this day, I can't explain what happened out there. The way the screaming seemed to come from nowhere, the fact that we didn't see anyone. I'm Amanda Willis. I live in a small town in the northern part of Michigan in a small cabin in the woods. Living in the woods in a secluded area is tough and often leaves people feeling lonely. As a result, I decided to go to my local shelter and adopt a dog. I figured I lived in a secluded area with lots of land and forest for the dog to run around. I also worked mostly from home, giving me the free time needed to take care of a dog. At the local shelter, I noticed nothing odd. It was the normal barks and whimpers of dogs, wagging their tails excitedly to leave their kennels. I'll be honest, I always hated going to animal shelters. Seeing all the animals, some cowering, and some begging to be let out, always filled my heart with sorrow. I was sick of the loneliness, though, and to be completely honest, I am not the biggest people person. So a dog it was. I had always wanted a dog as a kid and loved every dog I was allowed to pet. My parents could never afford one, and I never got around to getting one as an adult. I was most interested in getting a larger dog, one who would enjoy running around my land and perhaps even go on long walks with me. Most of the dogs just didn't appeal to me until I came across a large, scrawny black and white mutt. I'm not the greatest with dog breeds, but I had guessed possibly border collie, greyhound, and perhaps a little bit of pit bull. The shelter labeled the dog as a border collie mix. The dog had a longer snout, blockier head, long thin legs, and a leaner build. He had half-pricked ears, one slightly floppier than the other. His eyes were an icy shade of blue, but one had brown mixed in. He was stunning. I knelt beside the cage and he wagged his tail and hesitantly got up and approached. His movements were off. It was like that of a creature not quite used to walking on four legs, like a human trying to walk on four legs. "Who's this guy?" I had asked the worker who had accompanied me into the kennel room. "Oh, him," she had said nervously. "He's a dog we recently took in, found by some stranger on the side of the street. No sign of a microchip and no one has taken him in, but..." The lady had trailed off, clearly uncertain whether to say something. "What about him?" I had asked. "He acts a little weird. Doesn't play with the other dogs. Heck, the other dogs seem scared of him. Whenever he approaches even the friendliest dogs we have at the shelter, he sends them running away, barking and snarling, hackles raised and trembling. He's been returned 5 times in the month we have had him, all without notice. The owners always return looking nervous and never give us a clear answer." The shelter worker stuttered out her reply. At that moment, I felt bad for the poor boy. It wasn't his fault, but I guess I should have heeded the warnings. I adopted him and took him home that day, and things got weirder each day. On the way home, I took him to the local pet store, a small family-owned business on a leash. Every dog that came across him lunged and barked, cowering behind their owners. Every dog, no matter the breed or size. Even a guide dog I had frequently met when I went into town had lost it. That dog was the most stable ever, never barking or showing a speck of fear or aggression to anyone. It was odd, but I just figured it was nothing. Perhaps the normal. I had never owned a dog before, so I didn't question it. I had, jokingly at the time, named him Cujo after the rabid saint, Bernard in Pet Cemetery. Now I'm afraid that it isn't a joke anymore. The first odd behavior I noticed was the way he seemed to stare deep into nothingness. I had taken him to the vet, concerned about some brain problem, but there was nothing. He was, as the vet said, healthy as a horse. I awoke some nights to him on top of the bed, his icy blue eyes staring deep into my soul. His eyes some days were too human-looking. They weren't the normal eyes of a dog, even for the ones that have blue eyes. Everything went silent when we entered the woods together. Birds flew away. Crickets stopped chirping. Not a single snap of the twig in the distance. Just complete dead silence. His eyes appeared to glow in the dark, a piercing blue through the dark of night. The experience that confirmed my theory was after a month of owning Cujo. The name had stuck. I awoke at night to a strange silence that had fallen across the house. I got up, my throat dry, to get a drink of water. The house was dead silent. Not even the house settling was heard. My heart hammered in my chest as I headed for the kitchen. A crunch, snap, crack was heard from the direction of the kitchen. "Cujo," I called out hesitantly, and the noises stopped. I entered the kitchen to see Cujo standing on his back legs, his arms positioned weirdly, and the worst part about it, his head was turned around so he was staring at him. His back facing me, but his head was swiveled around. His mouth was partially open, drool dripping from his mouth. I let out a scream and sprinted to my room. The next morning when I crept out, Cujo came to me with a wagging tail, holding something in his mouth. He dropped it at my feet, and I nearly gagged as the body of a dismembered squirrel landed at my feet, its intestines leaking from his body. I found many more of those that day, of many different animals. Even a deer he had somehow brought into the house. The smell of blood and decay was evident even after I scrubbed the house from head to toe. At that point, I didn't know what to do. I was terrified of him, but I didn't want to return him. What would I even tell them? Plus, he wasn't a bad companion outside of those incidents. The worst experience of all was when I awoke facing the ceiling. I didn't open my eyes right away, but I felt something dripping onto my face. I groaned and wiped the liquid away. I opened my eyes and let out a scream. Cujo was on the ceiling, his jaw stretched out so wide it looked to be dislocated. He was perched on the ceiling, his body twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. His eyes were glowing, not a faint glow, but a full-blown glow that illuminated the whole room. A light blue glow. His teeth were sharper and his nails were gnarled claws digging into the ceiling. Bits of plaster fell onto my face. I froze and couldn't move. I was so terrified I was frozen out of fear. The creature above came to change, its face fading from one of a dog's into one that is almost human. Its fur and flesh fell away, turning into the skin, hair sprouting from its head. The creature looked like me, except it was wrong. Some things weren't right. Its eyes were slightly too close, nails a little too sharp, and nose the wrong shape. To the blind eye, it was me, though. It took one of its bony arms and hit me as hard as he could. I awoke with chains connecting me to the wall. No matter how hard I tugged or shifted them, I couldn't figure out a way to unlock them. It was like the creature welded them to my legs. I could hardly even move. I'm typing this out on the last of my phone battery. No one is picking up my calls, and I'm afraid of what is to come. I came with a warning. There is someone out there pretending to be me. If you meet someone with long brown hair with green eyes that seem a little too close, claiming to be Amanda Willis, that is not me. I am locked in a basement, chains welded to my legs. I fear I may die down here, and that thing is going to take my place. I'm afraid it has already hurt people. If you adopt a dog from a local shelter and he displays any unusual behavior or appears wrong in any way, return the dog and get rid of it as soon as you can. That is not a dog. The following was found in a text file on the desktop of a public library computer. I don't even know how to start. What I'm about to describe is the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. And I've seen most of the videos people describe as being the worst, most traumatizing things on the internet. Some of those still haunt me, or they used to. Brief flashbacks that temporarily removed my faith in humanity. But this is a whole different kind of trauma. I can't sleep anymore. I don't dream now, it's just nightmare after nightmare. The paranoia alone has destroyed my life. I'm terrified of the consequences of my knowledge. There is only one saving grace, but I don't know if that's the last of my optimism deceiving me. I think my mind has simply had enough now, and I'm almost now ready to accept my final defeat. But before I go, I need to tell someone what I saw. I got into using the Tor browser to explore the deep web. If you don't know, Tor is what lets you visit onion URLs, long strings of characters that are impossible to guess or even remember. When you start your deep web journey, you'll probably be using one of the index portals, but I became obsessed with exploring every kind of thing it has to offer. Eventually, I found my way onto the oldest form of dark links. You'd never know what you'd get. Guns and drugs would be obvious guesses, but dark web storefronts can't thrive if nobody knows about them. The real secretive stuff is precursor chemicals for batch making of other chemicals, the kind of the thing that only a few buyers would be interested in. Weird drugs I'd never heard of, poisons, corrosives, all that heavy shit. Some of them even had shopping lists, so you could, quite literally, pick your poison and have all the ingredients added to your cart at once. There was murder for hire stuff, of course, but I never ventured too far into that. Mostly it was just an info sheet. Send an email via Proton Mail to so-and-so address and await further instructions. There was plenty of hacking stuff too, but I know well enough to steer clear of that. I was a coder myself, and I know more than enough to understand how severely just visiting the wrong site can fuck you. But that's enough preamble. I'm probably just putting it off because I don't know how to say it. So here goes. I found a link on one of those forums, and this was deep stuff. A link from a link from a link. The only description offered was a strange word, which apparently means battleships. It was anonymously posted, and the forum was Russian, which is to be expected if you go deep enough. All the page showed was one BTC, a Bitcoin wallet address, and a password input box. This was only last year, so that's about $90,000. A fair bit more than what I can afford, but like I said, I was a coder, and I had to know what could possibly cost that much. I looked at the source code for the site and found the script that verifies the password. For the record, most form handling on the internet takes place on the server with back-end code, but for whatever reason, the important bit here was done using JavaScript, which runs in the browser and can be viewed by anyone. I found the bit of code that handled the password confirmation, which checked for a certain response from a server. My best guess is that it was using a pre-built service for verifying a transaction and sending back confirmation. But the result was always the same, one of two onion URLs. One was called red in the code, the other called blue. I chose red and visited the URL. Most of the page showed a camera feed. I wasn't sure what I was seeing at first. It looked like a top-down view of a large cellar or a dingy warehouse or something. In the middle was what looked like a large wooden surface made up of lots of wooden planks. That's what clued me into the scale of this thing. It was massive. It had a grid drawn onto it with white paint and letters down the side, ABC, etc., and numbers across the top, 1, 2, 3, etc., and across the surface were what looked like rusted metal circles. Some of them had what I think were blue plastic discs, maybe frisbees or buckets or something. Each grid space had either a metal circle or a plastic disc in its center. Some of the blue discs were in a line, with others dotted around the grid. The rest of the page had what I understand now to be a chat feed. There were a bunch of grid values, alternating in red and blue, B6, E8, back and forth. Very occasionally there was white text saying sunk, following one of those values. So it was red versus blue, I gathered, in what looked like a very large live game of battleships. I still wasn't sure why the cost of entry was so high, though. I watched the chat until someone sent new coordinates. It was a middle value, E5 or something. Then I understood the scale of the platform as a man in heavy boots and a balaclava walked up to the coordinate and stomped heavily on the metal circle several times. I thought that it must have been the top of a pipe, and the man was pushing it through the wood. Then he dropped a blue disc onto the now flatted metal thing. There were two more things on the page, an audio button, which I guess toggled the volume, and numbered buttons along the bottom. 1 to 7, I think. I clicked button number 2, and my curiosity was instantly replaced with terror. The video feed changed to show below the platform. Some kind of metal caging. The metal things were huge spikes, driving into wire and rust wrapped around flesh. There were bodies fastened to the bottom of the platform, but I couldn't recognize anything as a person. Just masses of broken body parts, bones, skin, blood, organs, hanging down, dripping on the floor, mashed up into the wire. I searched for a meaning to it all, something recognizable, and saw a face. Just about, half off, pierced. I was horrified, but still couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then I made the biggest mistake of my life and enabled the audio. Another metal pipe came smashing through, cracking, stomping, screaming. It pushed into a set of thighs, snapping off their bottom halves completely. And my God, the sounds were the worst of it. I'd never heard terror before, now it's all I hear. Then I saw a smaller body, 2 grid cells worth of a person. That's when it all hit me. I screamed and puked all over my desk. I wanted to pour bleach into my brain and burn it all away. That's when the reality of this whole setup started to sink in, and the fear started. I closed everything as fast as I could. Still covered in vomit, trying to hold back more but spewing over everything, I unplugged my computer, yanking out every cable from the back of it, breaking some in the process. I ran to my kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, hid in my bathroom, locked the door, curled up and started bawling. I stayed there for days, shaking, crying, unable to sleep. I stopped eating. I stopped going to work. I stopped talking to people. I couldn't trust anyone. I lost my job, my home, all of it. I spent a year cowering in the shadows, waiting to be found. But that's enough now. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And if I'm going out, I'm doing it on my own terms, not strapped to a fucking game of battleships. When my friend warned me about the forest, I laughed it off. Now I can't stop hearing the howl. I know it's still out there, waiting for me. I never planned to stay in the cabin for long. It was supposed to be a retreat, a place to quiet my thoughts, far from the city's suffocating noise. When my friend Chris offered me his family's old cabin up north, he called it rustic. That was generous. The place was a relic, sagging under the weight of neglect, surrounded by a forest so dense it seemed alive. Solitude was the point. Forgetting was the goal. The drive up was a blur of empty roads and wilderness, the kind that makes you feel untethered from reality. By the time I arrived, the sun was sinking behind the trees, casting shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers over the clearing. The cabin loomed there, stubborn and solitary, like it had been waiting for me. Chris had mentioned the forest with a half smile 2 weeks earlier. Some people say weird stuff happens out there, he'd said, swirling his beer. Just don't let it get to you. I'd laughed it off, even teased him. But now, standing in the shadow of that oppressive tree line, his words replayed in my mind like a quiet warning. As I unpacked, the first cries of the forest rose in the air, sharp, shrill, and inhuman. My skin prickled, but I forced a laugh. Just an owl, I muttered, though my voice didn't quite sound like my own. Inside, the cabin smelled like decay and disuse. The generator coughed to life, throwing weak light into the gloom. I grabbed a book, determined to distract myself, but the sounds of the forest kept breaking through, a symphony of distant rustling and faint echoes. It wasn't until the scratching started that I put the book down for good. It was subtle at first, a faint scrape against the back wall. My fingers froze on the page as I strained to hear. Another scrape, slow and deliberate, like someone testing the wood. "Chris?" I called, my voice wavering. I knew it wasn't him. Chris wouldn't drive hours into the wilderness to prank me. But the alternative, that something else was out there, was a thought I wasn't ready to entertain. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the back door, the beam trembling as it cut through the darkness. Nothing. Just swaying grass and shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I forced the door shut, locking it with a shaky hand. "It's just an animal," I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. But deep down I felt it, that itch in the back of my mind, the primal knowledge that I wasn't alone. The sound didn't stop. Through the night it continued. Soft crunches of leaves, faint creaks of the cabin, and once, a sound so close and deliberate it could only have been breathing. I told myself to sleep, but each time I closed my eyes, my body jolted awake, my nerves screaming at me to stay alert. When morning finally came, I stepped outside to investigate. The sight froze me in place. Tracks, clawed and impossibly large, circled the cabin in uneven loops. They weren't like anything I'd seen before, and their size suggested something wrong. The day passed in a haze, my mind trapped in an endless loop of questions. What had made those tracks? Why was it circling the cabin? I busied myself with menial tasks, splitting wood, scrubbing the kitchen counter, but my gaze kept drifting to the tree line. The forest seemed to press closer, its shadows darker and more tangled. I locked every door and window as night fell. The noises started earlier this time, scratching, followed by the low rumble of something alive. Not just alive, but aware. The sound wasn't random, it moved, circled, tested. I clutched the flashlight, my knuckles white against the cold metal. Then came the howl, a deep, mournful wail that carried through the trees. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't anything I could name. The sound crawled under my skin, stirring something primal and ancient. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but the fear was too real. My mind spiraled. What if it gets in? What if I can't stop it? What if it already knows how this ends? Sleep was out of the question. I spent the night staring at the door, flinching at every noise. By the third day, I was unraveling. Every shadow felt like a threat, every gust of wind a whisper of something hunting me. The solitude that once felt freeing now felt like a trap. As dusk fell, I set up crude traps around the cabin, pots, pans, anything to give me warning. It was ridiculous, childish even, but it was all I could do. I was adjusting one of the traps when I saw it. A shape moved in the trees just beyond the reach of my flashlight. My breath hitched. The beam wavered, catching the glint of something watching me. Eyes, amber and glowing, brimming with a terrible intelligence. The light flickered and the figure melted into the darkness. My heart raced as I stumbled backward, the weight of its gaze lingering long after it was gone. That night, the cabin was a prison. I sat by the fire, shotgun across my lap, jumping at every creak and groan. The howling returned, closer now. Then the scraping began again, this time against the front door. I rose shakily, the shotgun trembling in my hands. "Leave!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The scraping stopped. For a moment I thought it was over. Then came the growl, a deep, guttural sound that shook the air. My chest tightened as I aimed at the door. The silence that followed was unbearable, every second stretching into eternity. Then the window shattered. Glass exploded inward as something massive lunged through, a grotesque hybrid of man and beast, its fur bristling, its eyes burning with malevolent glee. I didn't think. I didn't plan. As the creature lunged, instincts buried in ancient parts of my brain took over. My first shot barely slowed it, but the deafening roar of the shotgun gave me a few precious seconds to move. I bolted through the back door, slamming it behind me as I stumbled into the forest. The night swallowed me whole. The trees pressed in, their branches clawing at my skin as I ran blindly through the undergrowth. My breaths came in shallow gasps, the cold air biting at my lungs. Somewhere behind me the creature howled, a sound that reverberated through the darkness, rattling my bones. It was playing with me. I could feel it. The forest was a maze, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a harbinger of death. I tripped and fell, the earth rising to meet me in a brutal embrace. Pain shot through my knees and hands, but I scrambled to my feet, terrified of what might catch me if I stayed down. I felt its presence more than saw it, a shadow that moved too fast, too deliberately. My flashlight flickered, its beam catching a brief flash of fur in those terrible eyes. I wanted to scream, but my voice was locked behind a wall of sheer panic. It could have caught me, I knew that. It was faster, stronger, more capable in every way. But it didn't. It wanted me to keep running. Why? Why didn't it end this? What did it want? The questions spiraled, my mind grasping at answers even as my body screamed for rest. By dawn, I was completely lost. The forest stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of gnarled roots and towering trees. Every direction looked the same, the light barely penetrating the dense canopy above. My legs trembled with exhaustion, my throat raw from gasping for air. Exhaustion clouded my mind, leaving only fear. But one thought stood out above the chaos. It's not over. It's never going to be over. That's when I stumbled into the clearing. It was unlike anything I'd seen before, a stark contrast to the suffocating forest around it. The ground was bare and scorched, the air heavy with the scent of ash and decay. At the center stood a stone altar, its surface carved with strange symbols that seemed to shift under my gaze. The sun cast harsh shadows over the bones scattered around it. Human bones, picked clean and gleaming white. My stomach churned, the sight almost too much to bear. This wasn't just an animal. This was something older, something far beyond my comprehension. This was its domain. I was trespassing in a place I didn't belong, and I realized then that I'd been led here. A growl rumbled behind me, low and deliberate. I froze, every nerve screaming in warning as I turned. The dogman stood at the edge of the clearing, its hulking form illuminated in the morning light. It was larger than before, its muscles rippling beneath its dark fur. Those glowing eyes locked onto mine, and I saw it. Recognition. It wasn't just hunting me, it was toying with me. This wasn't an animal, it was a predator, intelligent and malevolent. It was in control, and I was just the game. My fingers tightened around the shotgun, the only barrier between me and certain death. The creature's growl deepened as it stepped forward, its lips pulling back to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. This was it. The end. No one would ever know what happened to me, why I vanished without a trace. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of my fear. The dogman didn't stop. It moved slowly, deliberately, savoring every step as it closed the distance. I fired, the blast echoing through the clearing. The creature flinched but didn't fall. Blood matted its fur, but its movements were unbothered, as though pain meant nothing to it. Desperation surged through me. My body acted on autopilot, grabbing a jagged bone from the ground and swinging it wildly as the shotgun fell from my grasp. The bone caught it across the muzzle, and it let out a guttural snarl, more annoyance than pain, but it was enough. I ran. The forest blurred around me, my legs screaming in protest as I forced them to move. Every second felt stolen, every step closer to freedom, or death. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the undergrowth, its growls reverberating through the trees. I burst from the forest and stumbled back toward the cabin, slamming the door behind me and collapsing against it. My chest heaved, my hands trembling so violently I could barely think. The growling started again, louder this time, reverberating through the walls. It was everywhere, surrounding me. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but it seeped into my mind, into my very bones. The first rays of sunlight crept through the trees, washing the forest in an eerie golden light. The growling stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the car keys from the table, every muscle in my body screaming in protest as I stumbled outside. The woods were deathly quiet, as if the creature had never been there at all. I sped down the gravel road, the cabin shrinking in my rearview mirror. My mind raced, the memories replaying like a horror film I couldn't escape. The howls, the glowing eyes, the altar. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped, that it had let me go. By the time I reached the gas station, I was trembling so badly I could barely keep my grip on the steering wheel. I broke down the moment I stepped out of the car, tears streaming down my face as the reality of what had happened crashed over me. The police didn't believe me. They found nothing at the cabin, no tracks, no broken windows, no altar in the woods, just a rotting structure with nothing out of place. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the wind is just right, I still hear it. A howl, long and mournful, calling out from the distance. And I know it's not finished with me. First recording and set begins. I'm glad I asked for extra tapes. The mailman gave me 3 extra recorders with the tape box. I'm missing 3 out of 4 now, including the original, and it's irking me just a tad. The first one we used for that decoy maneuver, and it saved our lives, so it's no big problem. The other 2, though, I've got to go looking. If they'd been taken by someone regular, I honestly would just sigh and move myself on. I can get more pretty easily, most likely just need to ask. So it's no skin off my back, and it probably won't break any laws that'll get skin off someone else's, since it don't matter to me much. Thing is, though, a certain previous passenger took it. I'm a bit worried they'll go on and get into mischief, get themselves hurt. There isn't much important information in these yet, just my personal feelings, a few bad days. But I don't know where the line will be with prying if someone curious decides to give it a listen, or hell uses it as a trap for someone else. And there's a lot of curious, not quite fully adjusted sorts around here. I went with my new trainee to that strangely named town once I healed up. I was real curious and I felt I needed a break. The lodge, it didn't stop following us. Not entirely. I asked around about it, got my memory jogged a bit. I know I've seen it before. Turns out it's been a problem for a good while. I think it waits till you forget it. Or if you won't forget it, it tries to stress you out, break you down until you either make yourself too much a fighter to trouble with or you keel over. I don't think I'm that much a fighter, but security is, and my eyes are real wary on the road now. Long as I don't fall for none of its tricks anymore, it can't do much. And I like to think, when I try real hard to keep my head on straight, I'm a smart enough fellow, so this town... Turns out that, yeah, the pictures are in fact the name. Dog, cat, man. Dagger is a bit of a mouthful, though, so I'm personally just calling it the menagerie. I walk in with my trainee, and I find it looks a heck of a lot like an old theater mixed with a carnival. But if you blew its proportions way up like a circus tent till it turned into a whole community. All these fancy lights all around. All these shops with strange names. Even the live-in space was odd. The houses were tent-shaped, but made of wood that was either real dark or real colorful. The town rules, too, were a bit perplexing. They read like, no intentional violence, no intentional stealing, no toxic food or drinks, no flashlights, and no traffic blockades, and no excessive capital letters. They had a punishment list that was fairly straightforward, too. It said breaking rules may result in fines, banishment, loss of tickets, social shunning for a determined period, or refusal of sale. At first, I'm kind of on edge. The place seems too straightforwardly strange. On the road, after a while, you expect people to either be real awkward and confusing, real polite and warm, or real sneaky and predator-like. Always some nuance or some hidden line to tiptoe across. But my trainee goes right on through, beckons me with her hand, and I follow. I trust her, and I think to myself that sometimes you need to let your guard down for a bit, else you go mad. First thing I notice is the great abundance of cats roaming around. All sorts of color schemes. Had everything from midnight black to fuzzy orange to polka dot. The second I notice is the puppet carts. I see the shadow puppets my trainee mentioned the other day, and find they're quite literal. There's a shadow for everything old and new I could recognize or probably place if I thought real hard about it. The shadows of businessmen, doctors, officers of the law, animal shadows, more monster-type ones, exaggerated to show lots of teeth and with plenty of dramatic posturing. There was even a mailman, a milkman, a bus driver just like me. If I looked at the shadows, they looked real detailed. Kind of like if you took your own shadow, gave it a lot of texture, outlined it with a lighter or deeper shade of black, then stuck it back on the wall. Every single one was either way smaller, like you'd expect, than the real thing, or life-size depending on the size of their cart. I kind of got nervous moving around them. Thing is, around these parts, even if you find a place where some rules matter more than others, something that seems straightforward probably isn't. Might not even be intentional. Not everyone has all the little ins and outs of something they make up click right away. I was worried if I passed by one of these folk, I might rip them in two with my own shadow, distort them and cause them hurt. Eventually, my trainee tugged on me while I was walking about like a lumbering ogre with tiny feet, all cross-stepping and hunched and shying away from the world. "Look," she said, pointed. So I looked, and saw I needed to pay more attention to my surroundings than my fears, since a light reflected just right and I saw there was a thin sheet of some kind of colorful glass on every cart, so pale it blended in with all the lights around. I peered at one and saw they all had little notes. Flashlight, hazard sign, shield equals prohibition sign, thumbs up. Huh. Well, ain't that swell as beans? Beans aren't supposed to swell. I looked at my trainee's feet. She didn't have toe beans. It took me longer than it should have for my goof to click. She kind of stared at me like she was wondering if I needed to go back to a medical sort of place, then grinned real big, then laughed. "I'm old. Let me be slow sometimes." I smiled, though I felt my face go red a bit. We went to a diner after wandering around a bit. I realized that I should probably make a habit of visiting these places from time to time, that I need to unwind so I don't spin out like a bad fishing rod when it's most likely to cause me to crash and burn. Wandering proper, actually stopping at the stops and smelling the flowers, would keep my head on right, remind me why I want people to get back to these places all safe in the first place, see them with their own eyes. I took a few notes on what I saw, in case I had passengers like these ones later. Wondered if I could finally find a place to get the side ramp fixed in case someone needed to wheel up onto my bus. The diner was real colorful, and it felt homey. When I walked in, it was all bright red booths, checkers in black and white on the floor, old music, that kind of crackled in a pleasant sort of way. I think I almost remembered a few things right then, just walking in. I get scared of remembering sometimes. Worry it'll burn out my necessary senses, make me question or think ill of folk. I know well there's gaps, honest. I may seem all befuddled, like I don't know there's secrets all around, but you're not supposed to pry. And truth be told, I think sometimes that applies to yourself too. That if you look too long in the mirror, you'll start missing things, not see what's in front of, like I'm doing right now. Okay, I'll back up a bit. So we sit down. I hear the seat squeak under me, feel myself creak with the bend of the leather. Something smarts, and I wince, and my trainee looks at me like she's expecting me to snap in two. I'm good. I smile at her, tip my hat, and she smiles back at me a little nervous-like. I struggle for a moment when a waitress comes up to me. She's fully normal, so to speak, far as I can tell. Like me. Cherry hair and freckles, wearing a nice dress that's all blue, white, and pink with a little hat that reminds me of a fondant. I look around, see more sorts like us. I feel a grin creep onto my face, feel a little giddy. The tension drains out of me. I realize it's a safe place, where everyone walks the same. Something less warm tugs at my heart, too, but I push it down. I don't like the cold. It turns out that old money is good here still. I keep a wallet with me that's a bit big, with some oddly shaped pockets and even some tiny hooks. There's all sorts of stand-in money around these parts, see? I'd sort of expected to trade in the item for item style, and my heart raced a bit as I thought I'd be stuck walking into a diner with my very own apprentice and showing her I wasn't prepared for something as simple as dinner. I work things out, we have a bite, and... Trainee, why do humans eat things like that? So much... excess. I thought I was going to die. Driver. You know, I kind of thought the same. Chuckle. I forgot how much we put in things when you let us. Trainee. You almost keeled over like a fly getting swatted. Driver. Heartburn is serious business. So are heart attacks. I try not to ponder back too far, to wonder when it was last time I'd had me a milkshake with a cherry and everything, when I'd traded $1 or a nickel or a quarter for something. It's easy to let the fog slide over my memory when they bring in one of those puppet carts. I look around, notice that there's a few of them in the corners, or even at the windows where the shadow folk were just mimicking. I saw one with a little shadow bus and a hat shaped like mine, copying my every motion, sitting just like me. When I looked down, my own shadow was still there, right at my foot. When I looked up, I saw there was a stage in the corner with a big red curtain. I can't quite remember if it'd been there before, but could have been easy enough. I was a bit distracted when I came in and all. On the stage, there's one of them carts. Looks like they're doing a play. Yeah. My trainee seems pretty interested. I watch her glue her eyes to it. I find myself transfixed, too. I don't sit down and just let myself be entertained often, least not without being ready to spring back up and hit the gas or concede my time to someone else's directions. Trainee, it was a beautiful reenactment. Driver, reenactment, like historical, trainee. Yes, very important part of the past. You wouldn't know about it, though. Driver, should I? Trainee, number number I learn about then that, though all the shadow folk seem to have a preferred, maybe default, resting, shape, the shape, they can change it up as they please. Probably shouldn't have been surprised about it. They don't really announce the topic of the show or dim any lights. Though the shadows around the stage grow, the light in the stage area gets a little brighter. Just a tad more visible. I eat kind of quiet, like as I watch a story unfold that, far as I remember, goes a little like this. A king loses his country, but he still has his people. So he gathers them all on one big fleet of ships. The king gets old and tired and loses most of his fleet as he endures a number of grueling trials. 12 ships turn to 11, then 10, then go all the way down to 2. He's looking for a new land to call his own, see? But he doesn't manage to find a place without tricks and dangers. By the end, he's being called upon by some kind of moon goddess. When she tells him she has a place for him on the moon, she says she only has space for one ship. When he asks why, she says there's one too many people between the ships, and not enough of the ship's wood can be repurposed to build new houses for all of them up in the sky. So the king refuses the second ship's insistence on staying back on Earth, and then all his most loyal subjects offer themselves to stay behind. The king says he is not the country and stays behind in the dangerous below lands, all by his lonesome and without a vessel. I nod and toss something the performer's way, and I looked back to my trainee to ask what she thought. Remember that one fellow I mentioned before? The one who sent the odd letter about the clouders? Yeah, it turns out he'd been sitting there for a while. I jump out of my skin and clutch my shirt. Feel like I should be calling a name for some reason out of being startled, but I struggle to call it up before I just frown. How long you been here? Since the cats called to me. I can't remember what their voice sounded like, but I think it was unusual. I realized my trainee had probably noticed before I did. I was so enraptured, and her ear being so big. He'd come in from the right. I'd back and forth some letters with them for a while as I was cooped up in bed. My trainee brought me in the slips, sent some back for me. She didn't read them, was polite as could be. My trust got a little thicker. It was good to know I could trust her to go where I needed her to get. That she knew how to handle herself, knew the land, knew not to stick her head where it don't belong. Didn't expect to see you here. How are things going? Over the wall. Part of me was a little curious for more personal reasons. Getting exposed to the diner atmosphere made me rash, I think. They didn't respond with much detail at first, but they warmed up quick enough. I'd started calling them Ori, like origami, since that's what they reminded me of. Nickname, of course. I don't ever ask the actual name, not safe out here. I am amassing a following, they told me. Like a ballet group? A litter. They pause for a sec, kind of do some equivalent to a head tilt. Clouder. Chowder. I wasn't sure what that word meant. You don't hear it often. Cats, like you call rabbits in groups herds. My trainee mimicked the head tilt. I think I saw Ori relax there. They kind of folded, or unfolded. Not sure, into their seat. The noise that made wasn't pleasant. Really? I looked at my trainee. Fluffle, colony, nest, attendancy. Huh. Why the last one? She just smiled at me. I'm looking at her right now and she's smiling here too. Trainee. I'll show you later. We talked for a while, the three of us. I settled in, let myself become one with the booth leather, left a big old imprint when I got up later. I think I almost dozed off at one point. It was a nice little moment. I was allowed to lower my guard without consequence. I think my trainee and Ori hit it off a bit. I kind of wanted to tease her about it, but I didn't really know how. Strange bedfellows. Rabbity growling. I didn't know rabbits could do that. She's making a face at me, all quiet now. Driver, you okay? She's just looking out the window. So I finished eating a while ago by this point. I'm wanting to get back on the bus. Make sure everything's in order still. I get antsy when I'm away from it too long. It'd be a hard thing to steal. I've got enough sentimental items on it. If you tried to drive off, you'd call up the notable silence. My head's a bit fuzzy. Something would happen quick like. Anyway, Ori leaves first, I think for a bit. I'm a little worried about them. They mentioned a lot of things about animals, shelters, alleys, whatnot. They were clearly comfortable with me enough to tell me how they were really feeling about the world. So I called them a particular word. Let me know if you need to be getting anywhere, friend. And I smile, tip my hat. They pause and they kind of nod. In their own way was more a bend, twist, crack. And my trainee points out to me something isn't there anymore a bit after they're gone. At first, I'm back in my old head when I used to, I think, go to diners a lot. Something took my wallet. But then I realized the recorder is gone. I'd brought one in, to show if there was a shop about, see if I could get some old tapes, or new ones. Maybe they still make new tapes, I thought. I'd heard about audiobooks being a thing, but it's not there. And when we get back to the bus, I notice half my tapes are missing. And so is another recorder. Trainee. I remember the sound of their heartbeat. It took me a while to understand. They're strange on the inside, different, but it had been beating very fast. New recording begins. They did not like the way I bent, how I fit so easily into spaces, how I was too short or too tall, and even the ones who liked me thought I was awkward. The noises I made they hated the most, but the feline I did not look at. I did not want to be hated by something so small and beautiful. Yet it approached me. It made a pleasant noise. It did not shy away when I returned the same sound. I offered it something of value, something to eat in one hand. In the other, I hesitantly offered affection. And it did not reject me. I found more, and they accepted me as easily. I found many that had been left to be alone. Those who were abandoned, those who were too ugly, those who had been lost or never been wanted in the first place. I learned there were those who would destroy them, forget them for being too plentiful. Why was something so beautiful not something to want in abundance? I forget much, but I do not forget the beautiful things, the pleasant sounds, the sensations. Am I wrong to not remember all that I experience and am told? I remember something well, that you do not take that which does not belong to you, but I have done it. I have done it. I will not let them be abandoned, removed, forgotten. It wants voices, so I will take them. New tape is inserted. New voice, I love you too. New tape is inserted. New voice, when will dinner be ready? New tape is inserted. New voice, you performed beautifully today. New tape is inserted. New voice, I saw something bright, a beam in the alleys last night. Should we call the police? New tape is inserted. New voice, I think something is watching me. New tape is inserted. New voice, she's been missing for weeks. You have to find her. New tape is inserted. New voice, I thought the glass was supposed to be durable. It broke the glass so easy. Who do I tell? You're not supposed to be able to do that. The rules? New tape is inserted. New voice. I've heard noises from the old tunnels lately. Flickering, shuffling footsteps. I heard them this morning right under my house. Do you think it's back? Extended shuffling, paper moving, cracking, tearing, long silence. I am going to the tunnels now. The secret places where the cats should reign, their greatest alley. I was happy to see the driver again. The last time I saw them, they had seemed sick. They reminded me of me, but if they had been bent that way instead of born bent. I will send them a letter of apology later. I will remember to bring something. They do not notice at the gate still when I hide the cats. I will build my kingdom and become a lord who cares. Should I tell him something is wrong with his transport? I may need strong wheels to carry my clouder. First recording resumes. Brief silence. Give me a second. Lengthy pen scratching. Okay, I'm good to continue. I'm sorry, I gotta skip ahead a bit. I gotta skip ahead while it's still in my noggin. I gotta record it so I don't forget. We ask around town. It's a little hard to do. I wasn't sure if the big rules were the ones I use on the road, the ones they use in the bright or over the wall, or the local ones were first in order of importance, or if they were the only rules that mattered. It was a big enough place, had a strong enough soul. It's fruitless for a while. We get some rumors, a few directions, but the word of mouth and the trail ends in a crevice just big enough for our friend to fit through, and we don't know where it goes. A cat comes up, starts scratching at the wall, and I remember something. Ori drew pictures with the slips sometimes. Once it had drawn a black cat with a little white spot on its ear. Said they were taking them to a real shelter. I watched it sniff around. My trainee tilted her good ear its way. Its heart is beating fast. The cat makes a noise at us, scratches at the wall, then circles before bounding off. I get a hunch. I nod at my apprentice and we both follow it. It takes us through the zigzagging streets and away from the colorful lights, the music, the familiar and strange shades of warmth. It takes us to some kind of tunnel entrance. It looked familiar somehow, and it clicked that it might have been an old maintenance tunnel of some kind. I stood there for a moment, realized I could sort of feel a road somewhere down there. Thing is, the roads aren't always where it makes sense on paper. Sometimes they just go through places. Sometimes the world fades away and you pass through everything like it isn't there. I frowned, felt my shoulders tense up. I looked about me and I couldn't really square the opening with everything else. It was at the far end of town, but if I pretended it made sense with the layout, it connected to nothing and was just there. It was all boarded up too. Was a sign with pictures on it. Caution sign, sad face, dog, dagger, tombstone, flashlight. I didn't know what the hell it meant. But the black cat slid through a crack in the boarding like it were nothing, and I realized I could picture a real flexible fellow fitting in easy. I didn't need much convincing. I asked my trainee to stay behind, since she was kind of holding herself oddly, breathing a little strange. Quiet. She wouldn't leave it be, though, and pointed out I was more like to not come back than she was. I went in anyways, tried to stay in front of her. Had to pry out the nails from the boards till I could bend on through. I got a little mailbag type pack with me I carry around sometimes. Got it from the office. I use it to carry mail when I'm helping the mailman, and when I'm not, in goes some tools. You never know what sort of things you'll deal with on the road, see? Or when you'll need to pull or pick or twist or pry something. I hold tight to my hammer till it hurts. I don't plan on hitting anyone with it, not even if they come running at me. Bad way to get caught on the fine print, that. All something needed to do was give me a good scare, make me swing, and all of a sudden they had the right to every hair on my head. The tunnel twists oddly. It seems like a standard maintenance tunnel, all sorts of pipes, some side doors. I don't look in those, don't want to get tricked into prying. The tunnels are just a bit too wide, a bit too high. The ceiling kind of bends here and there, and I don't know why. I hear footsteps from above, but I'm sure there's not a single soul walking on top. Nothing for us to be under, far as I could tell from the outside. The place just connected to a random building in a quiet, barely inhabited part of town. Didn't even have a second floor, like it was half finished. I noticed there's a light switch on the wall. Then I notice there's a bulb above my head, and I follow it to find there's dozens of switches and bulbs. It's not dark in here, a little too bright since they're all on. When you haven't been in a place like this, sometimes it gets harder for the out of touch to click. Things that shouldn't be subtle become so, while obvious things remain obvious once your instincts are trained just right. It's how the world gets you, those blind spots. Eventually, the tunnels turn into a maze. I start seeing some places where the bulbs aren't on. I don't know if I should or could turn around. I get weary, strain my ears, but my trainee still has the better, so when she perks her head up and starts walking, I just follow. I hear noises from the doors sometimes. I side-eye them, but keep myself from peeking, and I notice that a lot of things are very evenly paced, despite the unusual shape of things. Every light bulb was at an exact interval. Every switch. The doors, when they were present, had a very particular pacing. I wondered if, should I be handed a map of the place, I'd find the uneven bits were, themselves, spaced a certain way. The cat starts heading a different direction from us, from my trainee. I pause, slap my hammer into my hand as I think. I start hearing voices. Watch the cat and the rabbit. Thump. My trainee pauses. She and the cat cock their heads like twins towards the sounds. We're at a spot where the tunnel splits in two and the cat is just a little down the left one. Right, I remember now. That's what their voice sounded like. Their voice and another are both coming from the two tunnels at once. I brought the voices, you may take them, return what is owed. Ori's voice had the texture of jittery, frail paper, like when I'd first heard it. I heard a shuffling, cracking noise, remembered I'd heard it when the bus had gotten stalled. I think it was a nervous tick. I think they'd been doing it in the diner too, but I hadn't noticed then. I started moving towards it, but I paused, shifted my feet and pursed my lips. Were you the one flashing down the tunnel during the blackout? Wasn't funny, you know. Scared the shit out of me. The other voice was gruff, bitter. I don't understand. I heard shuffling. That frail, jittery voice got thinner and whispery. We need to fix the wiring. Something's bad with the pipes too. The hell is... Sounded like a woman, maybe. Yes, take it, thank you. A pause. Pal? I heard cat noises. Saw the black cat sprint down the left tunnel making those same noises. I paused. I realized I was hearing the other voices from two directions, but I wasn't hearing Ori from both anymore, just the left. I hear a lot more voices pop up to join the chorus. Coming from the same direction Ori's was now, played with that slight static off a voice recorder. The train stopped and won't go. I saw light down the tunnel. Do you think something's wrong? A younger fellow. I hear shuffling. My trainee is moving down the right tunnel, following something only she seems to hear. I freeze up a bit. Things aren't clear, but I have to make a choice. I choose wrong. I go with the cat, and I realize too late Ori's voice is getting further away, not closer, and is now behind me. The lights flicker off, all of them at the same time. There's silence for a moment. Then I see a flashlight at the end of the tunnel. I traded something with you, fair and square. You need to give me back something of the same quality. The voice was more refined now, like someone trying to do an impression of someone quite polite and civilized. I think that's when I realized I didn't hear a lot of the shadow folk speak. There's something shuffling behind the doors. Do you think it's rats? We can't have rats in storage, last damn thing I needed. There's a brief pause, like a pin dropping. What the fuck is that? And I realize it's coming from the far end of the tunnel where the light is beaming out. Something opens, somewhere in the dark. I hear a lot of creaking, slow and patient. A switch flicks off and I hear something move. In a perfect pattern, all the switches jerk up and down, and so do the bulbs they're tied to. More lights join the first beam until my whole vision is filled with moving spotlights, darkness left stretching behind them as the light from the bulbs jumps down the hall. They're coming my way, and the length of empty wall space between each switch is longer than my stride. I start running. I'm breathing hard and my heart starts to hurt. I feel cold. I hear flicking and shuffling. I hear someone else running, and I think the cat was following me, padding along at a sprint. Its black fur was ready to be swallowed into the dark. All the light needed to do was pass it, and it'd find that despite the white on its one ear, its coat blended perfectly with the shadows. I can't outpace it. I run until my lungs are ready to give out. I stop and spin and twist, and the world flashes in black and yellow as I try to figure out where my friends had gone. My passengers. I needed to get them where they needed to go, and I couldn't do that if we all went away. But the tunnels are full of side paths, and the voices are everywhere. I'm heading your way. Come towards me if you can. It sounds like my trainee, smooth and gentle, even though I can hear the strain in her voice. Clam? Jasper? Ori calls out a dozen different pet names, but I don't think it's them speaking. They couldn't fit in so many places, no matter how much they twisted. It lets me keep going until I'm about to collapse. The cat is gone. It went a lot quicker than I did. Had the strength to claw what it came for out of the monster's jaws and knew where the beast hid. I watch it race ahead, dashing through the lights that flickered on in its path to guide it. All the lights switched back off as the cat passed them, then strobed once I stopped hearing the pattering of paws. I turned into a junction between tunnels. Any way I went, they'd just come at me from my front and from behind, from both sides. There was nothing I could do except wait for the pincer to snap. The whole world around me was yellow and black. Patterns repeated and moving through a maze they knew well as they closed in on me. The bulb's harsh brightness stepped towards me in skips, clicking to announce their advance. They stopped in front of me. I saw a flashlight that was a little too big, and the light bulb behind it died and hid its shadow before I could see what was holding it. Okay, I'll tip the scales a little. Does that even it out? It spoke right in front of me. I wasn't keeping track of what the voices sounded like anymore, but this one I think it had used not too long ago. It sounded elegant and formal. It waited. I couldn't stand any longer, so I fell to my knees. I bruised them as I went down. I flexed my fingers, held the hammer, wondered if I could just smash the light. Wondered if maybe it cared more about its face than it did the other people in the tunnels. I don't want to go away. Its voice was frail now, jittery, but it was determined and more certain than ever. But I want them to stay more. I heard the sound of paper shifting. Then there was a sound like a heartbeat that was too loud and too uneven, and I heard a click. Everything was silent for a moment and the lights were still, letting the noises echo unrestrained. The heartbeat stopped, and the lights started flickering again, showing us the way home. I didn't look in the doors on the way out, but I heard them creak open behind me. Around 36 cats in a wide variety of ages, colors, and breeds followed us out, each one slinking after us as I heard the groaning of rusty hinges. I didn't turn my head to watch them emerge. My trainee trailed after me, not saying a word. When we were far enough away from the exit, we couldn't see the tunnel's mouth anymore. She looked over her shoulder, stood there for a bit, and I waited for her. Her good ear stood tall, like she was waiting to hear something. When she looked away, when I saw her face, I think she wished she had. The black cat looked back too when we arrived at a low squat house with a sign out front that read, "Cat face, heart, origami swan." All the other cats went inside, one after the other, heads held low and steps tentative. They were all well fed, with clean coats. The black cat was the last one to enter. I saw its head swivel towards a sound. I saw it put a foot forward, mule low and flatten its ears, then go inside. When I turned to see what it had been looking at, I saw a flashlight in an alley on the other side of the street click on, then off. I'm going to look over the slips tonight. Send something. I don't think I'll get anything back. I called security, but I don't know if anything will come of it. I didn't find the other recorders. I'm tired. I'm sorry, but I think I'm going to end this here. Second recording begins. This is the trainee again. When we got back, I had to help him onto the bus. His heart was too fast, then too slow, and it flickered like that until he went to sleep. The slip. I don't think he noticed two out of it, but they already responded. He was looking through some of his old messages, so I knew which ones to look at. The handwriting was the same as Ori's, proper and elegant. It was asking for a trade. I took it down and tore it up slowly so he wouldn't hear. When I looked at what he'd been writing earlier, he had written their name many times, had started to draw their face. I finished it for him. There was a folded paper bird in the box he uses to collect payment. I answered the radio while he slept. We are missing a lot of tapes now. His heart does not sound well. The stars are bright tonight, the moon is full, I see a city on the moon, and there's a house there just for me. I think I need to learn faster. I need to figure out how to take him with me before I hear the moon's voice again. She's waiting up there, and I don't want her to be alone either. I don't want to go. Recording ends. I have to tell someone this. I've tried my best to just stuff this memory down deep in my mind by just not talking about it to anyone but my therapist. But I just can't anymore. I can't pretend. Maybe I'm being too dramatic, but I still wake up in cold sweats every couple of days. I need to talk about it. I used to live in a small house about 4 to 5 years ago. The house wasn't in a massive city by all means, but the city I lived in then wasn't small either. I'm new to sharing stuff like this online, and I'll keep as much information as I can private for my own well-being. Back then, I rented this house from a friend of my parents. It wasn't the best. It was in a middle-of-the-road trashy neighborhood with a break-in problem every other month for all 10 months I was there. And the occasional 2 or 3 drug addicts you'll see wandering the streets in a small southern city just asking for lighters and gum. I at least got a discount, and I could bring my pet because the owner knew my parents from all the way back in high school. And at the time, as a broke college student, I wasn't going to complain. I thought it wasn't the worst decision back then. I mean, it was really close to my campus, but after this experience, I regret it wholeheartedly. I type this to make it feel less real, as this experience still bothers me to this day. I had lived there for 8 months at this point. It was a smaller-sized 2-story house with a pretty big living room and a half of a hotel room sized upstairs with a banister overlooking the living room. The living room itself was really tall because the upstairs only took up the right side of the house. I had this smart TV on the living room wall and a coffee table I used in front of it. Most of the time, that coffee table held cheap empty beer bottles and plates of spaghetti. My dog Isaiah loved sleeping under the small thing, even though he was almost too big to fit under it. Isaiah was an English Cocker Spaniel who my parents had taken in when I was 14. He loved playing around with me in that house. Off topic, I know, but I'm trying to remember details. Underneath the upstairs was the kitchen, and inside of it was the pantry. It was about the size of a small closet, but at the time I probably didn't know that. I hardly used the thing. Every grocery store product I bought either sat on the tiny kitchen island inside the old rusty fridge or the cabinet, so I had no use for it. My dog would love hiding in it, though. Those times finding him would give me a near panic attack because I always thought he had found a way out of the house. Now, between both rooms and in the middle of the house was a pillar, and to the left of the pillar facing the living room was an old worn-down wooden spiral staircase. It creaked like a banshee every step you would take on it. At the top of the stairs was the upstairs banister that acted like a hallway connecting the already connected 2 rooms in the upstairs. The bedroom and the extra room, as I called it, were on separate sides, but both rooms were connected within them by a small hallway shaped like an archway. My bed was nothing much. I mean, it was an unsheeted mattress with symmetrical flower designs imprinted on the fabric. That extra room wasn't really used for anything besides getting to the small bathroom connected to it. In fact, it was the only way to the bathroom. I used it like an attic or basement, only using it for storing old pictures and antiques. All of this is needed, I swear. Writing this, it's all starting to flow back, all these vivid and small details. That day, I had just gotten off work and made a cup of coffee. That was my daily routine. Go to work, get home, make coffee, and relax. After I finished my cup, I quickly cleaned it and put it up. After that, I sat on the couch, only I was just slightly less tired than usual. Isaiah crawled on my lap and nuzzled up to me. I sat and pet him while on my phone. It was only a couple hours until dark, but I thought about taking a nap. As I sat there, I felt my phone vibrate. It was my friend Craig. He asked if I wanted to join the group going out bar hopping that night. It had been a while, and I missed hanging with the guys, so I decided to go. I got my coat and headed out the door. On my way out, I made sure to give Isaiah some love before I left. That whole night was a blast, and I remember it well. I only had a couple drinks and had an admittedly pretty heavy buzz going. It was filled with laughter, dumb jokes, and just an overall carefree attitude. I miss it so much. I never had a second thought that that night could be ruined. I drove home from the bars we drank dry, still with a smile on my face. I know it probably wasn't safe, but I wasn't the smartest back then. When I got home and walked to the door, I realized something strange. My door was unlocked. In my buzzed state, I just brushed it off as a sloppy mistake from earlier. I was tired, and maybe I just forgot. But as I walked in, I became privy to the fact that, yep, this night could be ruined. I sobered up fast looking into the place. As I stepped in, I looked at my completely trashed living room. My coffee table was flipped, beer bottles smashed, and my trash can had been ransacked. My couch cushions were scratched and torn open, spilling cotton, and different objects decorated the scratched floor. In the kitchen, my plates and silverware were smashed and spread out on the tiled floor, and my floor was dented and cracked by objects being thrown down extremely hard. My fridge was left open, half my drinks were opened and drank from, and food was left out on the counter and even the floor. Most of my cabinets and drawers had been ransacked. Hell, even my useless pantry was. My pure shock turned to utter frustration. I thought to myself, of course, a damn break-in. I stomped loudly to the kitchen and put the food I could save back in the fridge. I threw out the drinks. I wasn't drinking after some junkie. I was too pissed to even clean the silverware, but I did see from the corner of my eye that all the kitchen knives were missing. I thought whoever broke in had probably just strung it on the floor, but I never saw that, or maybe they had the gall to steal them to sell, who knows. I decided I needed to check upstairs to see the damage, so I started walking up the steps. I couldn't even hear the screeching steps. My foggy haze of anger had completely clouded me. I'm sure I sounded like a bull coming up those stairs. I kept stomping to the bedroom, furious as to what I might see. I got to the bedroom door and swung it open with a violent force, only to feel a wave of horror hit my gut like a bullet. My stomach churned as my heart sank like an anchor. My angry breathing was cut off in shock. The bedroom lights were off, and standing over my bed was a man. He never left my house. It had never even crossed my mind that he could still be here. The man must have been 6 feet tall, and he was just standing there right next to the pillows on the bed. All that noise I made should have alerted him, but no. I still don't know how it didn't, or maybe it did. I don't know. He faced the wall of the bedroom. A blank stare and chilling smile formed on the side of his face I could see. I could only make out certain details in the dark, but his smile was just there, like there was no happiness or malice behind it. It was numb and void of all emotion. Nearly covering his smile was a scruffy, unkempt beard with stains of blood in it, and a balding head with barely any hair left. He wore a dirt-stained, baggy dark gray t-shirt and light brown cargo pants with black stains and streaks along them. Afterwards, I would realize he had no shoes on, and his feet were bloody and leaving bloody footprints on the bedroom carpet. He had wrinkly gray skin with brown and yellow bruises on his arms. I slowly scanned him and saw his right arm. A massive wound on his wrist, still spurting blood like a water gun, was there. I could see his bone jutting through and chisel marks along the bone as if a dog had bit him. Isaiah, where was Isaiah? Questions ran through my head. Why wasn't he the first thing you checked for? Questions ran through my head. Where is he? Is he hurt? Questions ran through my head. I looked behind the man and onto the floor. Please, no. Oh God, no. My questions had been answered. Lying on the blood-stained carpet was Isaiah, every knife from the kitchen protruding from his body. He had one long cut in the middle of his back that went around his whole body, similar to a bisector. The blades stuck into him like nails in a board were placed in a symmetrical pattern, almost like a Rorschach test picture. The image of it still haunts me whenever I close my eyes. I felt tears swell up in my eyes as I looked back up at the man. He was now facing me. His head cocked towards me, but his eyes were transfixed on the mattress. His eyes scanned the mattress impossibly fast, and he scanned so many times, I thought he was counting nanometers. I looked closer into his eyes. They were bloodshot with such big blood vessels I thought they would blow up in his head like water balloons. His pupils were abyssal pits of black that seemed to swallow most of the eye. The horribly dilated circles stood still in an instant, still hyper-fixated on the mattress. His jaw began to move back and forth, and he parted his lips, more revealing sickly yellow and black teeth grinding on something. A piece of flesh sat in between his top row and bottom row, but not from my dog. Human flesh. I scanned the man once more and realized his right arm wasn't the only one gushing blood. His left was too, with another bite mark, but not from a dog, from himself. His teeth continued grinding against the meat as my stomach tied and tears spilled from my eyes. The teeth kept cutting and cutting into the flesh in his mouth until he cut the piece in half. One half fell from his lip and the other flopped out slowly from his agape jaws onto the bed. He slowly reached out his hands without moving his eyes and pushed the two pieces side by side. His neck creaked to the side, sounding like a firecracker, as if to show he had seen something intriguing. His teeth kept grinding together and even chattering as his eyes lit up when he saw the two pieces on the bed. He began making a tisk, tisk, tisk sound, as if stuttering on words. I wish he never got the words out. He spoke for the first and only time. Symmetry. I slowly backed up onto the balcony with the knot tied in my stomach, growing tighter by the second. The danger I was now in spun in my mind at that moment, almost making me dizzy. My heart beat like a drum as I thought of the man pulling a knife or lunging at me. But he didn't. He just kept looking at the bed as if it was the most beautiful thing in the world. I slowly closed the door with grace so as to not make noise and headed to the steps. Then it hit me. The creaky steps. My heart pounded even harder in my chest, feeling like it was gonna pop out as I thought to myself, did he see me? Didn't he cock his head at you? It didn't matter, I had to go. I took my first steps down the stairs. When my foot hit the stairs, it made a slight squeak as I put my weight on it. As I took step after step down, it got louder and louder. When the stairs hit its loudest, it sounded like a wailing baby interrupting a room of silence. I could hear my heart throbbing in my ears at this point, and once I took that last step, I heard it. The old bed upstairs creaking. That's when the pure horror of the situation hit my mind. He could come out of the bedroom in two ways. He could have a weapon or even a gun. What if he saw me or heard me? What if he... All of those horrific situations rushed through my head as I quietly made my way to the pantry and shut myself inside. I sat hiding in there, tears streaming and a lump in my throat aching. I wish Isaiah was here with me. As I hid in the corner terrified, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I was on the phone, I could still hear movement from the bedroom and maybe even the attached room. I was lucky that day as a patrol car was only a couple blocks away from my house. When the cop arrived, he already knew where I was and told me to stay downstairs, although I did come out of the pantry. He made his way up the stairs and entered the bedroom while I watched from the living room. I saw his flashlight click on and heard a groan that I assumed was the man. I heard the police officer's voice, but the man didn't even respond or put up a fight. The cop put him in cuffs and walked him out to the car. He put the man in the back seat and got my statement. After that, I went to stay in a motel. Only sitting on that hotel bed did a train of thoughts hit me, but out of them all, one hit hardest. My Isaiah was... I cried and cried that night until the sun rose. After that, I called some friends and stayed over at their places. I don't remember much else as I just stayed hammered for that week. Losing an animal from your childhood can crush you. By the time I got home, everything had been cleaned and I had been notified where my friends had buried my dog. They helped me so much, they even picked a nice tree to bury him under. That night I couldn't sleep even with a new mattress and new locks on all the doors and windows. Rolling over and looking at the floor, I could see the red stains in the carpet. This blob of red and footprints pointing me in the eyes. Sometimes I saw this massive puddle, almost like an outline of Isaiah, and the man walking away after he was finished. I bawled myself to sleep those nights. 2 months later, my parents' friend let me off the lease. I couldn't sleep anymore at that point. His face still flickered in my mind. I still checked every room in my house, even after I moved shortly after. I still do. Afterwards, I found out from one of my dad's friends who knew the cop who responded to my call that the man was incredibly dangerous and had been wanted for killing a woman outside of her apartment in the building hallway the same way he had my dog. He had major mental issues and was on multiple substances the night he broke in. The man couldn't even remember his name according to the cop. Although therapy has helped, I still blame myself. Why wasn't he the first thing I looked for? Why? I'm to blame for Isaiah. Maybe if I was home sooner, or if... I don't know, I hurt a lot and I miss my pup. I love you, Isaiah. My nightmares consist of me being paralyzed in bed even in my new house and that horrific man standing over me grinding his teeth and looking at me. He bites into me, making symmetrical marks along my body and carves symbols into my stomach with his bare and still bleeding hands. He runs his fingers across the deep cuts on my body, checking for perfection. He gets to my face and sticks his fingers in my mouth, grasping my jaw. He pulls his mouth to my ear and I smell his breath. It smells of death. He whispers in my ear softly with glee in his voice. Symmetry. This is not an intentional suicide note. I've been up for 87 hours. The kind of wakefulness that's so loud your thoughts echo off the walls of your skull. It's not insomnia, it's a necessity. The caffeine, it's the only thing keeping the engine running, and I've driven the thing straight into hell. The first thing to go was my teeth. It started with little black lines at the base of my molars like dirt shoved under fingernails. Then came the rot. I've seen apples left out on the counter longer than they should be. That's what my smile looks like now. Brown mushy spots where enamel used to be. And the smell? I've stopped talking to people just so I don't have to see the recoil on their faces. Sometimes I'll catch a whiff of it myself when I'm sipping coffee, and it smells like meat left out in the sun. Rotten, sticky, rancid. My gums bleed every time I take a sip of something hot. But that's just part of the routine now. The real problem isn't the teeth, it's the cravings. I don't think about food. I don't think about sleep. I think about the next hit. The bubbling gurgle of a coffee pot is music to my ears, a Pavlovian trigger that sends shivers down my spine. It doesn't matter if it's sludge scraped from the bottom of a gas station carafe or a canned espresso shot I found half crushed in a dumpster. I'll drink it. God help me, I'll drink it. A few nights ago, I stumbled into a gas station at 2 a.m. looking like I'd just crawled out of a grave. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the coffee cup, spilling hot liquid onto the counter. The clerk looked at me like I was some kind of animal. Maybe I am. When I reached for the energy shots, my hand knocked over the entire display. He told me to leave. I begged him. I actually begged him for just one bottle. When he wouldn't give it to me, I screamed at him. My voice cracked like dry wood, echoing through the empty store. I don't even remember leaving. I've started noticing things I can't explain, things that don't feel like hallucinations. Sometimes it's small, like a metallic tang in my coffee that lingers even after I've rinsed the pot, or the faint aroma of burnt blood mixed with the steam. But last night was different. I was staring into a mug, black as tar, the surface rippling with tiny oily swirls, when I noticed the color was off, darker, thicker. I tipped the cup slightly, and that's when I saw it, streaks of red swirling into the black. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real. My gums had been bleeding again more than usual. As I sipped, I must have swallowed some, must have let it drip down into the mug. The taste was sharper now, salty and sour, like iron melting on my tongue. I tried to pour it out, but my fingers wouldn't work right. Shaking, sticky, weak. It took all my strength to wrench the cup from my hand, the handle leaving an imprint on my damp, pale skin. When I dumped it into the sink, thick streams of coffee streaked with blood spiraled down the drain, catching in clumps on the metal grate. The sink filled with the smell, rotting, sickly sweet, a stench so powerful I gagged, tears streaming down my face as I clawed at my own gums, trying to stop the bleeding. But it didn't stop, it never does. I've started hoarding. The cabinet under my sink is full of expired instant coffee jars, cans of sugary energy sludge, and half-empty bottles of cold brew that smell like vinegar. I don't throw them out anymore, I can't. Even the sight of them comforts me, knowing they're there if I get desperate enough. And desperate doesn't even begin to cover it. Last night I did something I can't stop thinking about. I was out of cash, no loose change for the vending machine across the hall, nothing. I was pacing the kitchen clawing at my scalp when I remembered the coffee filter in the trash. It was wet, soggy, the grounds clumped together in a cold, slimy mess. I scooped them out with my bare hands and squeezed them into my mouth. The taste was indescribable, bitter, yes, but also sour, rancid, like something decaying. I gagged, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. My skin reeks. Not like sweat, not like someone who needs a shower. It's sour, it's acidic, like the inside of a trash can after it rains. My armpits, my neck, even my crotch. It all burns. The caffeine's eating me from the inside out, sweating its way out through every pore. My fingernails are turning yellow. My toenails are brittle. I pulled one off last week without even realizing it was loose. I'm sweating constantly. My skin sticks to my clothes and the salt burns when it seeps into the cracks of my dry, peeling lips. My heartbeat is a machine gun, a relentless tattoo against my ribcage that keeps me on edge. Sometimes it skips, just stops for a fraction of a second before resuming with a vengeance. That's when I think this is it, this is where it ends, but it never does. I have learned that the human body can take so much punishment, I think I've poisoned myself. There's a pain in my gut that's been growing for weeks. A gnawing, acidic ache that radiates into my back. The acid's eaten through something important, I'm sure of it. A constant churning, gurgling knot of acid and gas that won't go away no matter what I do. Sometimes I think I can feel it moving like something's growing in there. I've stopped looking in the mirror because my stomach is starting to bulge. It's not fat because when I press on my abdomen I feel something solid. A mass. Hard, immovable, and just wrong. A knot of caffeine-soaked bile twisting inside me like it's alive. I pissed blood this morning. It wasn't the first time, but it was the worst. The toilet bowl looked like someone had poured rusted motor oil into it. The pain was so sharp it doubled me over and I sat on the floor for an hour afterward, trying to catch my breath. When I stood up, I saw the stains on my underwear. Dark red streaks. It looked like someone had slashed a knife across my bladder. Do you know what I'm most afraid of? Not the heart attacks that linger on the horizon, or the seizures that might be brewing. I'm afraid of running out. I'm afraid of standing in an empty kitchen with nothing left to brew. The thought of being sober is more terrifying than death. I've considered other options. Boiling tea bags and drinking the water like a shot. Scraping the inside of old coffee filters with a knife and swallowing the grounds dry. I've even eyed the powdered instant coffee at the bottom of a jar and wondered what it would taste like if I snorted it. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The idea of stopping feels like staring into an open grave. I can't sleep. I can't eat. The thought of silence, the absence of that jittery hum rattling through my veins terrifies me more than the pain, the blood, the rot. Last night I found myself in the kitchen again, staring at the sludge I'd squeezed out of another old filter. I don't even remember walking there. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep the mug steady, and for a second, I thought about smashing it. Just throwing the damn thing against the wall and ending it all right there. But I didn't. Instead, I took a sip. It tasted like dirt and regret. The texture was gritty, the kind of grit that sticks to your teeth long after you've swallowed. But it didn't matter. It went down like all the others, burning, choking, filling the hollow space inside me that keeps getting bigger. When I finished, I sat there for hours, staring into the empty cup, waiting for the next craving to kick in. I could feel my body breaking down in real time. My fingers were cold and blue around the edges, my vision tunneled. But the caffeine kept my heart stumbling forward like a drunk. I think it'll stop soon. Not the cravings. Those won't stop until I'm dead. I mean the machine inside me, the one keeping me upright. It's been firing on fumes for days now, and when it finally gives out, I'll collapse. I'll puke up whatever sludge is still inside me, and I'll disappear. But until then, I'll drink. I never thought I'd be a single father at 35. Every morning I force myself to get up at 6:30, make breakfast for Tommy, and try to keep our lives as normal as possible. But it's hard. So hard. The house feels different now. Empty. Silent. Sometimes I catch myself staring at her coffee mug still sitting in the kitchen cabinet where she left it. I haven't touched it. I can't. Tommy, my 5-year-old, he's been surprisingly strong through all this. Too strong, maybe. When Sarah left, he didn't cry, not once, which is strange considering how close they were. He just keeps smiling, playing with his toys as if nothing has changed. The first few weeks were the worst. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see her face, her expression in those final moments. I can't think about that. I need to stay strong for Tommy. Lately, though, something's been off. I'm constantly exhausted, but it's more than just emotional fatigue. There's this heaviness. It started in my head like a fog that wouldn't lift. Then my shoulders began to ache as if carrying an invisible burden. I've been taking sleeping pills, but they don't help much. Sometimes in the corner of my eye I catch glimpses of something. A shadow, a silhouette. But when I turn, there's nothing there. Just empty rooms and silent walls. The worst part? The garden. I used to love gardening with Sarah. Now I can't even look at it. The soil seems different, darker. The roses she planted are growing wild, their thorns sharper than ever. They're blooming blood red this year. Tommy still goes out there to play sometimes. Yesterday I saw him talking to himself near the rose bushes. When I asked him who he was talking to, he just smiled and said, "Mommy's flowers are pretty this year, aren't they, Daddy?" I had to turn away. I couldn't let him see my face. The exhaustion is getting worse. At work, I can barely focus. My colleagues keep asking if I'm okay. I must look terrible. I tell them I'm just having trouble sleeping, still adjusting to being a single parent. They nod sympathetically, probably thinking Sarah left me for another man. If only they knew. Stop. I can't think like that. The weight on my shoulders has become almost unbearable. Sometimes I find myself hunched over as if something's pressing down on me. The doctor says it's stress, prescribed me some pills, but pills can't fix this. They can't fix what happened. Last night was particularly bad. I was washing dishes when I caught a reflection in the kitchen window. For a split second, I thought I saw Sarah standing behind me. When I turned around, there was nothing there. But the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of her perfume. That sweet floral scent she always wore. The same scent that still lingers in the garden soil. Tommy's behavior is starting to unnerve me. He's always been a happy child, but this is different. He hums to himself while playing the same lullaby Sarah used to sing. Sometimes I hear him laughing and talking in his room late at night. When I check on him, he's always alone, but his toys are arranged in a perfect circle, as if he's been having a tea party. This morning he asked me something strange over breakfast. "Daddy, why do you look so tired? Is it because you're carrying Mommy?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "What do you mean, buddy?" He just smiled and went back to his cereal, humming that damn lullaby again. The roses in the garden are growing faster than they should. Their roots must be reaching deep, feeding on... I need to stop. I need to focus on keeping it together. For Tommy. But this weight, God, this weight. Today, everything fell apart. Literally. I was standing in the kitchen, trying to make dinner, when the room started spinning. The weight on my shoulders had become crushing, like someone was hanging onto my back. My knees buckled. The last thing I heard before hitting the floor was the sound of small footsteps running down the hallway. "Daddy? Daddy, wake up!" Tommy's voice pulled me back to consciousness. I was lying face down on the kitchen floor, the cold tiles pressing against my cheek. As I struggled to push myself up, my shoulders screamed in protest. It felt like my spine was being compressed by an invisible force. I managed to get to my knees, coming face to face with Tommy. His expression wasn't scared or worried. He looked almost amused. The kitchen lights flickered above us, casting strange shadows on his small face. "Tommy," I wheezed, the pressure on my back making it hard to speak. "Don't you ever feel lonely? Now that Mommy's gone?" He tilted his head, looking at me with those innocent eyes. Sarah's eyes. Then he smiled, that sweet, childish smile that usually warmed my heart. But this time it sent a chill down my spine. "But Daddy," he said, his voice light and cheerful, "Mommy never left. She's always with us." My throat went dry. "What do you mean, buddy?" Tommy giggled, that same giggle he used to share with Sarah during their private jokes. "Silly Daddy. Mommy rides on your back every day. That's why you're so tired." The room started spinning again, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion. The weight on my shoulders suddenly felt different. More defined, more human. I could feel something pressing against my back, arms wrapped around my neck, legs gripping my waist. Something wet dripped onto my shoulder. When I touched it, my fingers came away red. Tommy was still smiling, still humming that lullaby. "Mommy says the roses need more water, Daddy. She says they're growing really well where you planted her. I can feel her now, even as I write this. Her weight on my back, her cold arms around my neck. Tommy is in his room having a tea party. I can hear him talking to someone, laughing. The roses are blooming beautifully this year, blood red and thorny, feeding on what lies beneath. And Sarah never left. She's still here, still watching, still riding on my back." In 2014, my wife, our 2 children, and I moved into a beautiful old mansion nestled in a small town lost in countryside. From the first visit, we were hooked by this house. Spacious, bright rooms, a huge garden perfect for the kids, and that indefinable charm of old buildings. It was exactly what we had been looking for. The real estate agent seemed thrilled to sell it to us. Their overwhelming enthusiasm, though slightly forced, had seemed odd at the time, but I didn't pay much attention to it. We were so enchanted by the house that we didn't dwell on their overly wide smiles or their somewhat evasive answers to our questions about the previous owners. Maybe that was just their nature. After all, we didn't know them, I thought. I still remember our first day here. The kids were laughing, running around the garden near the old rusted swing, imagining adventures in their new kingdom. My wife, meanwhile, was softly humming while unpacking boxes in the living room. Inspired by this idyllic atmosphere, I pulled out my old VHS camcorder, a relic from my youth, and began filming. I liked capturing those precious moments to create time capsules that we could rewatch together years later. The attic, on the other hand, had a completely different vibe. A dusty room cluttered with old furniture, sealed boxes, and forgotten toys. During the tour, we had decided not to bother with it right away. After all, the house was already spacious enough for this place to remain an abandoned storage area. A few months ago, taking advantage of a long weekend, I decided to tackle cleaning out the attic. I planned to turn it into a small woodworking shop for my own pleasure. My wife laughed, teasing me that I'd probably come back covered in dust and without having thrown anything away. The attic was complete chaos. An hour spent moving wobbly wardrobes and dusty boxes left me perplexed. Nothing interesting, just relics from another time. That's when I stumbled upon a taped-up cardboard box tucked into a dark corner behind a dresser. Curious, I decided to open it and found inside about 40 VHS tapes, neatly arranged. Each tape was labeled with a name and a date, with between 5 and 10 tapes per name. Anderson, 1986 to 1991. Miller, 1992 to 1998. Johnson, 1999 to 2006. Turner, 2007 to 2014. Fascinated, I set the box aside, promising myself I'd take a look at the tapes later that evening. Once the kids were asleep, I set up my old VHS player in my office. I inserted the first tape, expecting to either find something uninteresting or, who knows, maybe some old porn videos. The first video caught me off guard. It showed a family, presumably the Andersons, according to the label on the tape, freshly settled into our house. The father, smiling, explained that he wanted to immortalize their life here. The mother laughed while unpacking, and the kids played in the garden. An oddly familiar scene. But as I watched the tapes, the atmosphere changed. The videos, spaced out over several months, revealed a gradual deterioration. The laughter faded. The faces grew tired, worried. The children seemed calmer, more distant, almost fearful. A 1988 tape showed the mother cooking, while one child, motionless, stared at the camera for long minutes without blinking. Another, dated 1990, showed the father walking through the house at night, filming empty rooms while muttering incoherent words. The last videos were terrifying. There were arguments, muffled screams, and a father with a vacant expression. In one scene, he filmed his children sleeping in silence. In another, he stared at the camera, wearing a disturbing, wide smile. The last tapes, dated 1991, were the most disturbing. The house was in chaos. In the very last video, the man films his wife and children sitting at the dinner table before heading into the kitchen, then suddenly stops as he places the camera on the floor, filming the wall. Then there's a scream, and the video cuts out. The same pattern repeated with the other families. Always a joyful introduction, followed by a downward spiral into chaos. The last video of the Turner showed the father walking slowly down the hallway, whispering between ragged breaths, "Soon, soon." I wanted to share this strange experience. I don't know what to make of these tapes. The images haunt me, and I feel like I'm missing something. Maybe you have an idea of what this might mean. I can't sleep anymore. I've rewatched some of the videos, hoping to understand, but it's even worse. Plus, I noticed something. A blurry, almost imperceptible silhouette appears very briefly in several frames, always in a mirror or a window. It's motionless, long and thin. I think my mind is playing tricks on me due to lack of sleep. Mirrors make me uneasy, and I feel like I hear whispers at night. Last night, my son had a sleepwalking episode. He came into our room in the middle of the night and whispered, "Dad is here, but it's not Dad," before going back to bed. It's over. I destroyed the tapes. I burned them in the garden. I woke my wife and kids, and we left the house. We're in a motel for now, but something's not right. My son woke me up this morning after I shaved. He told me he saw someone in the bathroom mirror. "He was looking at you, Dad. He was smiling. It wasn't your reflection." The barking pierced the night again, slightly closer than the night before. It began each night around 2 a.m., seemingly from a small pack of dogs, and with each passing night it grew closer. Struggling against the suffocating heaviness of sleep, I reluctantly slipped out of bed and moved to the window. Half expecting to see the eerie glow of eyes or menacing figures, I was instead met by the dark, impenetrable forest bordering our home. The trees, swayed by a gentle wind, cast ghost-like shadows in the moonlight. With a deep sigh, I closed the blinds, a shiver of unease crawling up my spine. Jen, stirred by the disturbance, sat up. her face etched with worry in the dim light. "The dogs again?" she asked, her voice heavy with sleep. "Yep," I replied, my annoyance tinged with an underlying dread. We had lived on this secluded property for nearly 20 years. Although our nearest neighbor was about 3 miles away, the place had always been a quiet haven. After our son moved to the city, the nights had grown even quieter, interrupted only occasionally by the distant hoot of owls. The barking had begun just a week ago. Initially so faint I had to strain to hear them, but like clockwork, at 2 a.m. their barking would fill the night, only to cease abruptly an hour later. One night, convinced the source was right outside, I armed myself with my shotgun and turned on the powerful spotlights around our house, illuminating the yard as if it were daylight. Yet nothing appeared. The barking was unrelenting. Listening closely, I could make out distinct sounds. One bark tinged with cruel laughter, another a low mournful howl, and yet another resembling a whimper. As I concentrated, the underbrush near the forest's edge began shaking violently. I fired a warning shot, and the noises hesitated before fading into the forest's depths. After ensuring the barking had stopped, I turned off the lights and headed back inside. Jen, peering through the blinds, jumped when she saw me. "Damn it, Jack, you scared me," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of relief and lingering fear. "Sorry, love," I apologized, securing my shotgun and embracing her. "I should have given you a heads up. I know those dogs have got you on edge." She leaned into me, her grip tight. How could they not? Why do they start at the same time each night, and why are they getting closer? It's really starting to freak me out. I shared her concerns but tried to keep calm. "How about I check it out at dawn? Maybe I can find something," I suggested, hoping to ease her worry. She was hesitant but agreed, somewhat reassured by my resolve. The next morning I took my shotgun and headed toward the area where we had last heard the barking. These woods, a place where my son and I had spent countless hours hunting and exploring, felt different now. The familiar paths, slowly being reclaimed by nature, still bore the imprints of our past adventures. Lost momentarily in the beauty of the forest and memories of days gone by, I was jolted back to reality by a putrid smell of decaying flesh. Unable to locate the source, I continued deeper. Soon, I discovered clumps of dark black fur in the brush, young trees bent and broken, and numerous scratches on older trees. But it was the tracks that stopped me cold. They resembled those of a dog, yet were aligned too perfectly, too methodically, as if mocking the natural gait of an animal. Feeling watched, I hurried back home. Jen was waiting on the porch, her face written with concern. I relayed my findings, the unsettling tracks, the fur, the smell. It all seemed bizarre. "We should call animal control, Jack." "Honestly, we should have done it sooner," Jen suggested. I nodded and we called them. They promised to send someone the next day. Relieved, we prepared for bed, but exhaustion from the day's events quickly pulled me into a deep sleep. I was abruptly awoken by loud snarls, growls, and the deep barking of dogs, this time inside our house. Jen and I bolted upright. I grabbed my shotgun as the sounds of barking and whimpering echoed off the wooden floors. I quickly turned the bedroom door lock, securing it with a decisive click. But no sooner had the lock clicked into place than scratching erupted on the other side. The sounds were frenzied and desperate, accompanied by intermittent barking that now mixed with wet, heavy panting and what sounded disturbingly like mocking laughter. The chilling cacophony pressed against the thin barrier of the door, sending shivers down my spine and setting my every nerve on edge. I hurried to the bedroom window, peeking out and checking if the coast was clear before grabbing my keys. "We've got to get out through the trellis and make a run for the truck," I yelled over the noise, trying to keep my voice steady. Jen, clearly terrified, nodded and climbed down the trellis first. I followed closely behind her. Just as I reached the bottom, a loud snap echoed from above. My heart raced, and I looked up instinctively towards our bedroom window. A dog's head peered down at us, silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Though unseen, its eyes felt as if they were boring into mine. We dashed to the truck, our feet pounding against the gravel. As we peeled away from the house, the sounds of barking faded. We drove silently until we reached a lone gas station miles from our home. Catching our breath, the reality of our escape began to sink in. Jen looked at me, her face pale, eyes wide with lingering fear. "What kind of dogs were those, Jack?" "How did they get into our house?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of unspoken horrors. As the events replayed in my mind, the sinister tracks, the grotesque silhouette of the dog head, and the chilling sounds behind the bedroom door, I realized the gravity of what we had witnessed. Do you know of any dogs that walk on two legs?" I asked slowly, the horror of the realization echoing in the silence that followed. Marty was my father. He was a big Frank Zappa fan, and when he found out that Zappa's kids called their father Frank instead of Dad, well, old Marty thought it sounded to be a pretty good idea. A real epiphany, like how Marty grew his hair long and picked up all that groovy hippie hand jive just as it was becoming a thing. That and an ounce-a-week weed habit. I really wouldn't have cared about what kind of derelict Marty was if my mom hadn't disappeared when I was 6. She was Romanian and had escaped from behind the Iron Curtain with an aunt in the late 1940s. I remembered she was always laughing and smelled like lilacs and sunshine. And then one day she told me she had to go away, that she did not know when she would be able to see me again. Then she gave me a little jade stone and told me that if I hold it real tight and think of her, she'd know. 6-year-old me had no idea what she was on about, only that I was about to be stranded with Phineas Freak in a splintery bachelor pad that smelled like weed and takeout cartons and body odor. I started to cry. I thought I was going to get a hug, but then the hand came. Fast, furious, a stinging rebuke. "You will understand when you're grown up, but until then the first thing to do is never cry." I cried harder. Slap. More tears. Slap happy me. Then I began to convulse with the crybabies, and Mom's face grew furious before a curious thing happened. At first it tilted as if to get a better look. Then it softened. "Okay, my little Tigran. Perhaps you are right to cry like a little wimp. I wish you luck with that. Your father cried when he discovered that little bald spot on the top of his head." And then she was gone. I want to say Marty stepped up to the plate, but no. Marty hooked up with another hippie chick, Marlene. Marlene had a hair lip and only ate frozen Hostess dessert products. Didn't matter what, so long as it was frozen. Yodels, ring-dings, ho-hos, funny bones, Twinkies, chocodiles. That was the solid food. Beverage was always the same. Vanilla egg creams. For those of you that don't know the egg cream, it's an old New York City 20th century artifact, this egg cream thing. A vanilla egg cream is a cold beverage made with milk, seltzer water, and vanilla syrup, creating a frothy drink with a vanilla flavor. Despite the name, it contains neither eggs nor cream and is essentially a variation of the classic egg cream where the chocolate syrup is replaced with vanilla syrup. Oh, and LSD. Marlene loved tripping and playing with Marty's bald spot. And while Marty was self-conscious about his bald spot and didn't like it played with, he did like tripping. And I actually didn't mind when he was on acid. Anything could happen. In fact, one night Marty decided we needed to go to the comic book store to see if the comic books looked 3D. I remember it because Marty's bald spot was extra shiny due to the egg white and urine concoction Marlene kept rubbing into the spot. 8-year-old me didn't really know what tripping was, but 3D sounded badass, and comic books. Forget a boutique. Anyway, we left old Marlene sprawled out on the bearskin rug, tripping to the Beatles' Revolution number 9. Bring me back a Cosmo and Vogue, Marty, and don't let Tigran get more than one comic book. I wanted to say something, but I hated that fucking song, and I could always persuade Marty to get a whole fucking stack of comics, especially when he was stoned, which was like always. So imagine our surprise to arrive back at the bachelor pad with a half-gallon of Breyer's chocolate chip mint ice cream, and the latest Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, Plop, House of Secrets, Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man, and X-Men issues, and find something missing. What was missing was the red brick four-story building where Marty and now Marty, Marlene, and I lived. Only now where the building stood was but a carcass, the burnt-out remains of a poorly maintained roach-infested Midwood $120 a month two-bedroom. Only all you could see was what was left of the basement and rubble. So much rubble, if you looked down at your Chuck Connors, it could have been 1945 Berlin. But it was 1973 Brooklyn. Turned out old Marlene was cold and had turned on the stove. Only Marty had been too high to remember to tell Marlene the pilot was out. So old Marlene let that stove go to broil, like she always did in the winter. And then she flicked her bick to have a smoke and a pancake, and the next thing you know, the roof is on fire, and before anybody could let the motherfucker burn it blue sky high. I thought Marty would be all busted up once the fire department explained how Marlene exploded the apartment building. He seemed oddly serene, almost beatific. Back in his bug, Marty ruffled my head. It was odd because Marty didn't do displays of affection. Later that year, we moved into another building. Time passed. Marty's bald spot got bigger, and he took to the artful combover. And once again, Marty hooked up with another hippie chick, Siobhan. He picked up hitchhiking in Brooklyn. I knew it would suck barf chunks because nobody hitchhiked inside New York City, but the mentally defective. And what do you know? Siobhan smoked, tripped, and couldn't work a stove right on a cold winter's day. And what do you know? We just happened to be out when the building went kaboomski. And then we moved to an even nicer crib, this time on the Upper East Side of Manhattan near Central Park. Marty met one of those fancy society women, and soon there was talk about some genetic breakthrough at her brother's company that was going public. A cure for baldness, genetic engineering, truly groundbreaking stuff. They were going to clone Marty's follicles like Dolly the sheep. Couple of months went by and Marty checked his bald spot every night in the big vanity. This was usually followed by a tirade of expletives, and Siobhan would attempt to calm Marty. That only made Marty angrier. As the weeks bled into months, Marty became almost impossible to live with, even in a 4-bedroom apartment. I was about ready to join the Moonies and run away when I heard a scream and a crash. I ran down the long hall and looked in the bathroom mirror. Marty was jumping for joy. Hair! Hair! The sunshine! Hair! The sunshine! The sunshine in! Before my very eyes, in a very snakes and ladders shimmer, were new fine baby hairs sprouting, like Play-Doh. Marty screamed for Siobhan. Her brother came over. Marty was the first candidate to show positive results, and we are talking hair today and more hair tomorrow. So much more so that within a week, old Marty took to carrying a battery-powered electric razor with him wherever he went. I got so used to the constant drone of the razor. One day, exasperated, Siobhan snapped, "Can you stop shaving your head for a fucking minute, Mart?" He tried, and then for another. But like popcorn, you could actually hear those follicles popping. "You better call your brother. My skin feels weird." And then the popping lost top billing to the snapping and crackling. Marty was a fucking hair-growing machine, and not just his head anymore. Eyebrows, ear hair, nose hair, chest hair, arms, back, pubes, belly, thighs, and even his fingers got gnarly with a coarse, wiry hair that could pop a balloon. In the end, Marty had to have whole-body electrolysis and skin grafts from the third world before the hirsute horror that had become his life ceased. And then, hairless as a baby, Marty met the love of his life. A very large woman from East Germany named Gwen Stacy. We left the city for the country, and for the first time I found myself living on acres and acres of land, far as the eye could see. And there were horses and goats and unwashed hippies. And about a year later it burned down with my new stepmother, Gwen Stacy, in it. And then, Baldy and I were back in the city. I remember that winter asking Marty if I could go on a ski trip with the whole class at my new school when the doorbell rang. Marty did a final toot from the mirror and walked down the long parquet-floored hall to the front door. I continued watching MTV. I heard a commotion, but the hallway was so long. "Son?" I whipped my head around. Marty always called me Tigrin. My jaw dropped. I felt a sinking in the pit of my stomach, but it was nothing compared to the hole the wooden stake in Marty's chest was going to leave. "Son?" Marty looked down at the stake protruding from his chest. There was a lot of blood already. Marty opened his hand, and there in the palm was a small and oblong jade stone. It fell from his palm to the white and red with blood-spattered, bone-white shag rug. Marty followed suit, falling like ash from a neglected cigarette. And then I felt a chill, and from nowhere and everywhere I heard a voice whisper, "Don't cry. Ever." I don't really think about this stuff anymore, as it's over 40 years in the rearview mirror. Except an envelope came today. Inside was a small jade stone and a book of matches advertising some ambulance-chasing law firm. Inside the matchbook cover, someone wrote, "Sunny Boy." Rule 1, don't leave the bounds. Rule 2, always be cloaked. Rule 3, no more than 3 days. Rule 4, don't let the game live if you engage it in conversation. The famous rules of the haunted forest were carved in a rough and ugly hand on the weather-worn and mossy wooden board at the head of the trail. A wooden fence about hip-high ran along the periphery of the forest on either side of the trail entrance. The haunted forest. Sounds silly when you say it out loud, but it is the most haunted trail in the northern hemisphere. Every year there's more than 100 disappearances reported on this trail. You would think that should be enough of a deterrent for the tourists thronging to this trail. But as capsaicin showed, evolutionary deterrents sometimes have the opposite effect in the modern world. I've always been interested in the supernatural, and I love me a good horror story. But this is the first time I got to visit an actual haunted place. On my 30th birthday, my best friend Casey and I made a plan that we'll visit the haunted forest for our vacation in September. We chalked out all the details, contacted the local guides, and planned our 3-day camping itinerary. We were both so thrilled for this trip. Then 2 weeks ago, during the final prep for our trip, Casey got into a freak car accident. He broke both his legs, his right arm, and several ribs. He could have easily died. Thank God and John Hetrick for airbags. I nearly canceled the whole thing as it made no sense to leave Casey in the state he was in. But he convinced me to take the trip for the both of us. If I'm being honest with myself, I guess I even convinced myself that I'm doing this for Casey, and not just because I was so looking forward to this trip. In either case, here I was, and my first impression of the forest was underwhelming. It looked like a regular old forest except for the fence. I suppose even fenced forests aren't unheard of. But as we got closer to the trail, it felt like there was a vague melancholy radiating from the forest. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe it was just the mist. It was misty 300 days of the year in these parts. As we got to the trailhead, the guide stopped and said, "Okay, let's go through the details again. Don't lose," he prompted, waiting for me to respond. "My GPS, it's my way back." "Good. Always follow the rules." "All the rules," he stressed. "Don't be an idiot, tourist. We've nearly hit the quota for our missing persons this year. I don't want us to outperform last year." I've been meaning to ask, what's up with Rule 4? I always found it so strange. "Are the animals possessed?" I asked. "Don't know, don't care. You shouldn't either. It's in the rules and you follow the rules if you want to live." "Relax, I got this," I said. "You were supposed to be 2 people. I don't like last-minute changes. There's enough chaos in this place without the tourists bringing their own. If you ever get too scared, stop and build a tent and stay inside. Give it at least an hour inside the tent and turn back. Follow the GPS back to this location," the guide continued. "Sir, yes, sir," I said in jest. "Good," he said, either ignoring or completely missing the joke. "Here," he said, handing me a whistle. "This can help repel smaller predators should you encounter any. Remember, this is still a forest, haunted or not. Good luck and see you in 3 days." I nodded him a quick thank you as he was turning away and tucked the whistle in my cloak pocket. I turned toward the forest and took a deep breath of the fresh air before stepping onto the trail. That was the moment my life irreversibly changed. That step was my last act of free will. Of course, I did not know that at that time. At that time, it felt no different from the 1,000 steps before that got me to the trailhead. The first hour on the trail was remarkably unremarkable. For the first couple of miles, the trail was wide, flat, and for the most part clear. I felt no sign of life around me at first, natural or otherwise, aside from the ambient buzzing of the cicadas. As I walked on, the trail got narrower, with ancient trees closing in on the path from all sides. Occasionally, I could spot a buck in the clearings on either side of the path. Haunted or not, it was a stunning trail. I was like a kid on a roller coaster that started to climb up, waiting for the drop he knows is coming. The anticipation of the thrill was setting me on edge. Something strange was starting to mingle with it, though. At first, I thought it was the forest melancholy I sensed. That was dampening my excitement. It took me a good half-hour more until I was finally able to see it for what it was. It was fear. Raw, primal fear emanating from the most ancient part of my brain that sensed a threat to its survival. Fear was tinging my excitement, until it was excitement no more. It clouded my thoughts and made all my muscles taut. My heart was racing silently for fear of giving itself away to some unknown stalker. And then all of a sudden the cicadas stopped. My heart leapt into my mouth. I was suddenly acutely aware of how loud my heart was beating. In the silence the cicadas left behind, it felt like a jackhammer. I had goosebumps all over. Cold sweat started to drip down my neck. My mouth was numb and dry. My head jerked towards the bushes on the left of the trail as I heard a rustle. I leapt back with a yowl, landing hard on my butt as a large squirrel scurried out of the bush and scampered up the tree. "Jesus fucking Christ, you scared the shit out of me, you little dipshit," I blurted out. I sighed and took a deep, calming breath. As my composure and my sanity started to return to me, I chuckled at how badly I've scared myself. It's not the ghosts that scare us. It's the ghost stories we construct in our minds. Sometimes it really is in only our heads. I set my backpack down and got my water bottle out. I looked at my activity tracker while sipping the cool water. 5 miles since the start of trail. I've come across a grand total of 0 humans so far. What are the odds? September is such a popular season too. My unease started to creep back in. I shook my head and splashed my face with some cold water. As I turned to get my towel from my backpack, I noticed tracks in the mud. My own and someone else's. "See? Ghost stories, Sam. Ghost stories," I reassured my lizard brain. I got to my feet and started back up the path. I turned to take one last look at the clearing where I gave myself a heart attack before moving on. I stopped dead in my tracks. The footsteps, which a moment ago stopped at the clearing, now followed my own. They stopped a hand's width away from where I am now. "Just a trick of the light, just a trick of the light," I chant to myself. Heart pounding, I take a slow step backwards. Soft footprints appear in the mud next to where I stood a moment ago. It was happening right in front of my eyes. I cautiously took 2 more steps back. There they were again, right next to my own tracks. I've seen enough. I break into a sprint, running away from the clearing and from the footsteps that were following me. What the fuck was that? I'm safe as long as I follow the rules, aren't I? I said aloud to myself, now starting to pant. Something about the rules niggled at the back of my head, like a microscopic morsel that's stuck in your teeth. Small enough that you can't find it, but big enough that you know something isn't quite the way it's supposed to be. I thought back to everything that happened on the trail so far, replaying the events of the morning in my head. Then suddenly it hit me, and it was like my feet were pulled from under me. I could feel the taste of gall rising into my mouth. The squirrel. "You're a fucking idiot, Sam," I chided myself. The adrenaline surge that kept me going for the last 5 minutes straight at full sprint was wearing off. All the highs and crashes before were catching up to me as my breathing grew laborious. I snuck a glance over my shoulder to see if the footsteps or something worse were following me. Before I could see any footsteps, I clatter hard into something ahead of me. I crash onto the path together with who or whatever I ran into, completely winded. My head still throbbing and spinning from the crash. I frantically try and prop myself up to see what I collided into. There was a naked man curled up into a ball and groaning in front of me. I back away from him, whimpering and still panting from my manic sprint. Relief floods into me as the man starts to sit up and I get a better glimpse at his face. I crawl on all fours towards him and embrace him, sobbing loudly. "Oh, Casey, I thought I was gonna die. Thank God I found you. I was so scared." At this point, I was bawling loudly, clinging desperately to the familiar in this sea of strange I'm surrounded by. As minutes pass by, the tears drain my reservoir of fear enough for me to come to my senses. I've pulled away from the embrace and asked, "Wait, Casey, what are you doing here? Why are you naked?" "Oh, right, that," he said. "Let me fix that." In the next second, Casey was dressed in the exact same outfit that I had on, down to my backpack and boots. It was like looking into one of those funhouse mirrors. I pushed further away from him, looking at him warily from head to toe. "I'm not here, really?" he said hesitantly, as if he was broaching a messy, complex issue with an infant. "There was a further complication in the ICU after you left. I'm not really here. I'm not anywhere anymore, I suppose. I was adrift. And that's when I felt you. I could sense your fear, and it was like a warmth I couldn't turn away from. It was like someone smacked me in the face with a thick slab of ice. I was dumbfounded. It can't be. No. No. You were fine when I left. The doctor said you were out of danger. No. It can't be." I was rambling more to myself than to Casey. I'm sorry, Sam. I want you to know that I don't blame you. Not for what happened. Not for you not being there with me in my last moments, he said tenderly. I was the one that asked you to go. If our roles were reversed, you know you would have done the same. I sat there with my mouth ajar, my head in my hands, and my heart in a million tiny little pieces. Tears were streaming down my face, and grief was swelling up in my throat, swallowing any words that were going to come out until they were no more than loud sobs. I'm sorry, Case, I should never have left you. I should have stayed with you. I'm such a horrible and selfish person. I felt untethered, disconnected from the material world and sensations. Don't do that yourself. This is path we've set ourselves on long ago. Neither you nor I could have changed the course of events that came to pass. I can see that now. Being on this side, it gives you an interesting perspective, Casey said. All I could do in response was more sobbing. What should I do, Case? What should I do? Oh, geez. Look at you bawling like a babe. The voice was Casey's, but something felt off. The tone full of mocking condescension and cruelty. Casey is fine. Well, in as much as you can call not being able to walk or stand without support for the rest of his life fine. It was like 1,000 needles pricking me all over. Something about it set my teeth on edge. It pushed me over from grief and fear into anger. What the fuck are you? And what did you do to Casey? I asked through clenched teeth. Oh, I'm sorry, Sam. I totally forgot that you're differently abled when it comes to intellect. As I told you already, Casey is fine. He is in the hospital where you left him, slowly mending the hundreds of fractures in his body. As to what I am, that's a very complicated question to answer. The stranger cruelly replied. Are you a demon? You lying piece of shit, I seethed. How original, the entity spat back. No, I'm not a demon. If I were to dumb it down for you, I guess you could say I'm an immortal celestial being responsible for governing the ever-expanding universe. That strangely took out some of my steam. I felt for a second like a bacterium angry at the sun. It took me one more second to realize that it was actually the entity that put that notion in my head. Can you hear my thoughts? Can you control them? I asked, shocked and embarrassed. Yes, genius. How do you think I knew about your friend Casey? Not like he's a celebrity in the celestial circles. And yes, I can make you see what I want you to. It's how we communicate, the entity derided me. What are you called? With my anxiety and anger subsiding, my natural curiosity started to come out. You can't perceive my celestial name just like you can't perceive my true form. Here's the closest translation in your tongue. A darkness flooded my mind. I could tell it was an image the entity was projecting in my head. What is that? Black sky? I asked. Pfft, he swatted at the idea. It is much, much more complex than that. But as that's likely the upper end of complexity your little noggin can process, let's go with that. Hi, I'm Black Sky. Nice to meet you. Why are you here? Why me? Is it because I broke Rule 4 and talked to a squirrel? I blurted out the question bothering me the most. Black Sky burst out laughing, not cruel and callous as it's been so far. Just plain hearty laughter until there were tears in Casey's eyes. Oh God, I needed that. Thank you for that. The rules don't concern you. It is quite hilarious, though, what you humans make of it. As to why I'm here, why, this is my home, of sorts. I've been banished by my fellow Celestials. A matter of policy disagreements. I've been imprisoned in the hyperspace encompassing this forest. The true horror of my situation suddenly dawned on me. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I asked him, The rules are for you, aren't they? Black Sky looked at me, eyes wide with mock surprise, and said, It looks like my smarts are rubbing off on you. Yes, they're my prison rules, if you will. As long as I stick to those, I'm allowed entry into the dimensional planes of my hyperspace like this one for food and recreation. And we're the game, aren't we? I asked weakly, starting to feel sick. Very astute of you again. I get 3 days in a year in each dimensional plane to hunt and find my sustenance. The thought of being torn limb to limb and devoured by this evil in front of me broke me anew. Is it going to hurt when you... I asked, sobbing. Eat me. You won't feel a thing, my dear Sam. When someone gives you candy, it's not the wrapper you savor. I care nothing for your flesh, it is but a wrapper. And what's underneath? That's mine to savor for an eternity. Well, not really an eternity, but it's close enough as far as you're concerned. We're going to have a lot of fun together, Black Sky said with an evil glee on his face. I've been here ever since, trapped in this hyperspace, seeing what he wants me to see, playing out whatever scenarios he laid out for me. Sitting here talking to you, I've no idea whether you're human or one of the trapped, like me, or another one, his cloaks. What's worse, I've come to realize I no longer care. Whether I'm bait, entertainment, or food, I no longer have any say in the matter. I've lost any naive, misguided notions around free will a very long time ago. If you're smart, you will too.